The 13th century BC witnessed unprecedented upheaval across the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond, as established Bronze Age civilizations crumbled with startling rapidity. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece lay in ruins, their Linear B archives silenced forever. Hattusa, the mighty Hittite capital, burned and was abandoned around 1180 BC. Egyptian records speak of mysterious sea peoples whose origins remain debated, while archaeological evidence reveals widespread destruction layers from Troy to the Levant. This catastrophic period, known as the Bronze Age collapse, fundamentally altered the trajectory of European technological development and inadvertently accelerated the adoption of iron metallurgy across the continent. The disruption of established trade networks proved particularly crucial in driving technological innovation. Bronze production required reliable access to both copper and tin, with tin being especially scarce and often sourced from distant regions like Cornwall or Central Asia. When the complex mercantile systems that had sustained late Bronze Age societies fragmented, communities faced acute shortages of bronze-making materials. Iron ore, by contrast, was abundant across most of Europe. From the bog iron of Scandinavia to the rich hematite deposits of Central Europe, iron-bearing materials could be found within reasonable distances of most settlements. This geographical advantage, combined with the pressing need for metal tools and weapons in an increasingly unstable world, created ideal conditions for the rapid spread of iron technology. The earliest evidence of ironworking in Europe traces back to Anatolia and the Caucasus region, where experiments with iron smelting began as early as the 3rd millennium BC. However, these initial attempts produced only small quantities of wrought iron, often as curiosities rather than practical implements. The Hittites of central Anatolia achieved more systematic iron production by 1500 BC, carefully guarding their metallurgical secrets and referring to iron as metal from heaven in their cuneiform texts. Archaeological excavations at sites like Kamankalahoyuk have revealed sophisticated ironworking installations, complete with specialized furnaces and extensive slag deposits, indicating large-scale production. The technological breakthrough that transformed iron from an exotic material into a practical alternative to bronze centered on the development of the bloomery furnace. These shaft furnaces, typically constructed from clay and stone, could reach temperatures of 1200 to 1300 degrees Celsius through the use of bellows-driven forced air circulation. Inside the furnace, iron ore mixed with charcoal underwent a complex chemical reduction process, producing a spongy mass of iron called a bloom. This bloom contained significant amounts of slag and required extensive hammering while hot to expel impurities and consolidate the metal into usable form. The bloomery process demanded considerable skill and understanding of materials. Furnace operators had to maintain precise temperature control, manage the proper ratio of ore to fuel, and time the extraction of the bloom correctly. Too little heat resulted in incomplete reduction, while excessive temperatures could cause the iron to absorb too much carbon and become brittle cast iron. Successful smelting required intimate knowledge of local ores, their iron content, and associated minerals that might affect the process. Different regions developed distinct furnace designs adapted to their specific geological conditions and available materials. Forging techniques evolved rapidly as smiths learned to manipulate iron's unique properties. Unlike bronze, which could be cast into complex shapes, iron required extensive hot working to achieve desired forms. Smiths discovered that repeated heating and hammering not only shaped the metal, but also improved its mechanical properties through grain refinement. The development of quenching techniques marked another crucial advancement. By rapidly cooling heated iron in water or other liquids, smiths could produce harder, more durable tools and weapons. This process, combined with tempering controlled reheating to reduce brittleness, allowed for the creation of iron implements superior to their bronze predecessors in many applications. Regional variations in iron adoption reflected both technological diffusion patterns and local circumstances. From its Anatolian heartland, iron technology spread westward through the Balkans and northward into the Caucasus. The Dorian migrations in Greece, traditionally dated to around 1100 BC, coincided with increased iron usage in the Aegean region. However, recent archaeological evidence suggests that iron adoption was more gradual and complex than previously assumed, with bronze and iron technologies coexisting for several centuries in many areas. In Central Europe, the Urnfield culture, characterized by cremation burials and ceramic urns, played a crucial role in iron diffusion. Urnfield communities spanning from Bavaria to the Carpathians maintained extensive trade networks that facilitated technological exchange. Iron objects appear sporadically in Urnfield contexts from the 11th century BC, becoming more common by 900 BC. The famous Hallstatt culture, centered in the Austrian Alps, emerged as a major iron-producing region by the 8th century BC, controlling important salt deposits that funded technological development and trade expansion. The Alpine regions proved particularly significant for iron development due to their abundant ore deposits and forest resources. The Noricum region, encompassing parts of modern Austria and Slovenia, became renowned for producing high-quality steel known as ferrum noricum in later Roman sources. Archaeological investigations at sites like the Durenberg near Hallein reveal extensive mining operations, with sophisticated wooden infrastructure supporting underground extraction. These communities developed specialized knowledge of ore processing, including techniques for beneficiation, concentrating iron content through washing and sorting. Northern European adoption of iron technology followed distinct patterns influenced by different cultural and environmental factors. Scandinavian communities initially relied heavily on bog iron, a form of iron ore that precipitates in marshy environments. This resource, while abundant, required different processing techniques than the hard rock ores common in Central and Southern Europe. Danish and Swedish archaeological sites from the early Iron Age reveal ingenious adaptations, including the use of turf as fuel in areas where wood was scarce. The social implications of iron adoption extended far beyond mere technological change. Bronze production had been largely controlled by elite groups who commanded the resources and trade networks necessary for acquiring tin and copper. Iron's abundance democratized metal production to some extent, allowing smaller communities to achieve technological self-sufficiency. However, ironworking still required specialized knowledge and equipment, leading to the emergence of new craft specialists and modified social hierarchies. Trade networks underwent fundamental restructuring as iron technology spread. Traditional Bronze Age routes focused on tin sources became less critical, while new patterns emerged around iron ore deposits, fuel sources, and finished products. The famous amber routes connecting the Baltic with the Mediterranean adapted to carry iron goods alongside their traditional cargo. Archaeological evidence from trading centres like Fratesina in northern Italy shows how communities positioned at strategic locations prospered by facilitating the exchange of iron technology and products. Craft specialization intensified as ironworking techniques became more sophisticated. Unlike bronze casting, which could be performed by relatively few specialists serving large areas, iron forging required more distributed production networks. Local smiths became essential community members, possessing knowledge crucial for maintaining tools and weapons. This shift contributed to the development of more nucleated settlement patterns, as communities sought to support resident craftsmen rather than relying entirely on itinerant specialists. The military implications of iron adoption proved equally transformative. Iron weapons, when properly made, offered significant advantages over bronze equivalents. Iron swords could be longer and more flexible without breaking, while iron spearheads and arrowheads could be produced in much greater quantities. The famous Naue II sword type, characterized by its flange-hilted design and iron construction, spread across Europe during this period, representing a standardization of military technology that transcended cultural boundaries. Agricultural transformation accompanied metallurgical change as iron tools revolutionized farming practices. Iron plowshares could break heavier soils previously unsuitable for cultivation, while iron axes and adzes made forest clearance more efficient. The increased availability of iron tools contributed to agricultural intensification and population growth, creating positive feedback loops that further drove technological adoption. Settlement patterns shifted as communities could exploit previously marginal lands, leading to the establishment of new villages and the expansion of cultivated areas. The environmental impact of early iron production was substantial and often underestimated. Charcoal production for smelting required vast quantities of wood, leading to significant deforestation in areas of intensive ironworking. Pollen analysis from archaeological sites reveals dramatic changes in forest composition, with deciduous species often replaced by faster-growing varieties better suited to coppicing. Some regions experienced such intensive exploitation that they were forced to import fuel or relocate production centres as local resources became depleted. Religious and symbolic aspects of iron adoption reflected the metal's perceived properties and cultural significance. Many European societies initially viewed iron as possessing supernatural qualities, perhaps due to its association with meteorites, literally metal from the heavens. Iron objects often appear in ritual contexts, including weapon deposits in rivers and lakes that may represent offerings to deities. The transformation of iron from ore to finished product through fire and human skill created powerful metaphors that influence religious beliefs and mythological narratives across various cultures. The technological learning curve associated with ironworking was steep and required generational knowledge transfer. Master smiths developed closely guarded techniques for achieving consistent results, creating apprenticeship systems that preserved and transmitted specialized knowledge. Archaeological analysis of early iron artifacts revealed significant variation in quality, reflecting the experimental nature of early production and the gradual accumulation of practical experience. Some communities achieved remarkable sophistication relatively quickly, while others struggled with basic techniques for extended periods. By the 8th century BC, the technological innovations and social transformations initiated during the Bronze Age collapse had crystallized into distinct regional cultures across Central Europe. Among these, none proved more influential or enduring than the Hallstatt culture, named after the Austrian Alpine site where extensive archaeological excavations first revealed the sophistication of early Iron Age society. This culture represented far more than a simple continuation of earlier traditions. It embodied a fundamental reorganization of European society around iron technology, long-distance trade, and increasingly complex social hierarchies that would define the continent's development for centuries to come. The geographic distribution of Hallstatt culture encompassed a vast territory stretching from the eastern slopes of the Austrian Alps westward across southern Germany, eastern France, and into portions of Switzerland and the Czech Republic. Archaeological evidence reveals distinct regional variants that reflected local adaptations while maintaining core cultural characteristics. The eastern Hallstatt zone, centred on the type site itself and extending through Upper Austria and western Hungary, developed around salt production and iron working. Here, communities exploited the rich halite deposits that had formed in ancient geological periods, creating the foundation for unprecedented wealth accumulation and trade network development. The western Hallstatt zone extended across the Rhine Valley into eastern France and exhibited different economic foundations while sharing fundamental cultural traits with their eastern counterparts. Communities in Burgundy and the Upper Rhone Valley controlled strategic river crossings and mountain passes, positioning themselves as intermediaries in expanding trade networks. The famous Mont-la-Soie complex near the modern village of Vix exemplified this western variant. where local elites accumulated extraordinary wealth through their control of trade routes, connecting the Mediterranean world with northern European amber and metal sources. Regional variations extended beyond mere geographic boundaries to encompass distinct material culture traditions and settlement patterns. In the eastern zones, hilltop fortifications known as oppidae began appearing during the later Hallstatt period, featuring sophisticated defensive systems with multiple ramparts and elaborate gate structures. These settlements, such as the Huineburg in southwestern Germany, demonstrated advanced engineering knowledge and substantial labour organisation capabilities. The fortifications employed complex timber and earth construction techniques, with wooden frameworks supporting massive earthen ramparts that could withstand siege warfare while providing elevated positions for defensive advantage. The Huineburg site revealed particularly intriguing evidence of Mediterranean influence, including mud brick construction techniques entirely foreign to Central European building traditions. Excavations uncovered structures built using sun-dried bricks identical to those employed in Greek colonial settlements, suggesting direct contact between Hallstatt elites and Mediterranean craftsmen or traders. This technological transfer represented more than casual contact. It indicated sustained relationships that facilitated the exchange of both goods and knowledge across vast distances. Iberian Peninsula connections emerged through archaeological evidence of Hallstatt-style artefacts in northeastern Spain and southern France, particularly in the regions that would later become associated with early Celtic settlement. Iron Age communities in Catalonia and Languedoc adopted Hallstatt pottery styles and metalworking techniques, while maintaining their own distinct cultural identities. These connections likely developed through coastal trading networks that linked Atlantic and Mediterranean exchange systems, creating cultural corridors that facilitated the spread of technological innovations and artistic styles across diverse geographic regions. The social stratification evidenced by Hallstatt burial practices revealed a society undergoing rapid transformation toward increasing inequality and elite specialization. Elite burials from this period demonstrate unprecedented wealth accumulation and sophisticated craft production that surpassed anything seen in earlier European prehistory. The burial evidence suggests a hierarchical society with distinct social classes ranging from wealthy warrior aristocrats to specialized craftsmen and agricultural laborers. This stratification was not merely economic, but encompassed complex social roles and cultural identities that defined individual and group status within Hallstatt communities. The Hochdorf chieftain's grave, discovered near Stuttgart in 1978, provided extraordinary insight into Hallstatt elite burial practices and material culture. The burial chamber, constructed entirely of oak logs and measuring approximately 4 by 4 meters, contained the remains of a man approximately 40 years old who had been laid out on an elaborate bronze couch decorated with intricate figurative scenes. The deceased wore gold-decorated shoes, a conical hat made of birch bark, and was surrounded by an astonishing array of grave goods that reflected both local production and long-distance trade connections. The bronze couch itself represented a masterpiece of Hallstatt metalworking, featuring wheels that allowed it to be moved and decorative panels depicting warriors, dancers, and wheeled vehicles. 8 bronze figurines of women holding vessels adorned the couch's backrest, their poses suggesting ritual or ceremonial functions. The technical sophistication required to produce such complex bronze casting demonstrated advanced metallurgical knowledge and specialized workshop organization that could support extended production periods for luxury goods. Among the grave goods, a massive bronze cauldron capable of holding approximately 500 litres dominated the burial chamber's southern wall. This vessel, likely used for communal feasting or ceremonial purposes, was filled with mead made from honey, as revealed by chemical analysis of residues. The presence of drinking horns and elaborate serving vessels suggested that the deceased had played important roles in hospitality and ritual consumption practices that reinforced social bonds and demonstrated wealth to community members and visitors. The Vic's burial in Burgundy, discovered in 1953, provided equally spectacular evidence of Hallstatt elite culture, while revealing the extent of Mediterranean connections. The burial belonged to a woman approximately 35 years old, buried around 480 BC in a wooden chamber beneath a large tumulus. Her grave goods included the famous Vic's crater, a massive bronze vessel standing 1.64 meters tall and weighing over 200 kilograms, which ranks among the largest bronze vessels ever discovered from antiquity. The Vic's crater's decoration revealed sophisticated artistic traditions that combined local Hallstatt motifs with clear Mediterranean influences. The vessel's rim featured a continuous frieze of hoplite warriors and four-horse chariots, while the handles terminated in gorgon heads that reflected direct Greek artistic influence. The technical achievement represented by this vessel's production required not only advanced bronze working skills, but also the organisational capacity to coordinate large-scale production projects involving multiple specialised craftsmen. The woman buried at Vic's wore a massive gold torque weighing 480 grams, decorated with intricate geometric patterns and winged horses that demonstrated sophisticated gold-working techniques. Additional grave goods included imported Attic pottery, amber beads from the Baltic, and locally produced fibulae that revealed the complex trade networks connecting Hallstatt communities with distant regions. The burial's wealth suggested that women could achieve high status within Hallstatt society, possibly through inheritance, marriage alliances, or independent economic activities. Salt mining operations provided the economic foundation for Hallstatt wealth and cultural development, creating the surplus necessary to support specialised craftsmen, long-distance trade, and elaborate elite consumption. The Hallstatt salt mines, located in the Salzkammergut region of Austria, exploited deep underground deposits through sophisticated mining techniques that required substantial technical knowledge and labour organisation. Archaeological investigations within the mines have revealed extensive wooden infrastructure, including staircases, platforms, and hauling systems that facilitated extraction from depths exceeding 300 metres. The preservation conditions within the salt mines created an archaeological treasure trove that provided unprecedented insight into Hallstatt daily life and technology. Organic materials that would normally decay completely survived intact, including leather clothing, wooden tools, textiles, and even human remains. These finds revealed that miners wore distinctive leather caps and clothing designed for underground work, while their tools included specialised bronze and iron implements adapted for salt extraction. Mining techniques employed at Hallstatt demonstrated sophisticated understanding of geological conditions and engineering principles. Miners followed natural salt veins through the mountain, creating complex tunnel systems that required careful planning to prevent collapse. They used fire-setting techniques to fracture hard rock faces, followed by careful extraction using bronze and iron picks. The extracted salt was processed on site using wooden troughs and evaporation techniques that concentrated the mineral content for easier transport. The Durenberg salt mines near Hallein revealed similar technological sophistication, while demonstrating the geographic extent of Hallstatt salt production. These operations employed different extraction methods adapted to local geological conditions, including solution mining techniques that dissolved salt deposits underground before pumping the brine to surface evaporation facilities. The scale of production at both sites required coordinated labour forces numbering in the hundreds, suggesting complex social organisation and management systems. Salt's value in the ancient world cannot be overstated, as it served essential functions in food preservation, leather processing, and various craft activities, Hallstatt communities controlled these valuable resources and developed extensive trade networks to distribute salt across Central and Northern Europe. Archaeological evidence reveals Hallstatt salt reaching settlements as far away as Scandinavia and the British Isles, creating wealth flows that funded the elaborate material culture and social complexity characteristic of this period. Material culture innovations during the Hallstatt period reflected both technological advancement and increasing cultural sophistication. Pottery production achieved new levels of standardization and artistic elaboration, with distinctive vessel forms that spread across the entire Hallstatt cultural zone. The characteristic Hallstatt pottery featured geometric decorations executed in graphite paint, creating lustrous black designs on burnished surfaces. These vessels included large storage jars, elegant serving bowls, and specialized forms for specific functions such as ritual consumption or food preparation. Bronze vessel production reached unprecedented sophistication during the Hallstatt period, with craftsmen creating elaborate forms that combined functional utility with artistic expression. Bronze situli, bucket-shaped vessels used for serving wine or other beverages, featured complex decorative programs that depicted scenes of daily life, warfare, and ritual activities. The Certosa situla from northern Italy, though slightly later than the core Hallstatt period, exemplified this artistic tradition with its detailed narrative friezes showing banqueting scenes, processions, and athletic competitions. The artistic elements that would later characterize Latin culture began appearing in late Hallstatt contexts, particularly in the western regions where Mediterranean contacts were most intensive. These proto-Latène developments included increasingly curvilinear decorative motifs, stylized animal representations, and complex interlaced patterns that departed from earlier geometric traditions. The transformation was gradual rather than sudden, with traditional Hallstatt motifs gradually incorporating new stylistic elements that reflected changing aesthetic preferences and cultural influences. Metalworking techniques continued evolving throughout the Hallstatt period, with iron technology becoming increasingly sophisticated, while bronze working reached new heights of artistic achievement. Iron tools became standardized across wide geographic regions, suggesting technological exchange and possibly itinerant craftsmen who spread consistent production techniques. The development of pattern welding, a technique that combined different types of iron and steel to create decorative patterns in blade surfaces, demonstrated advanced metallurgical knowledge and aesthetic sensibilities. Fibulae, the safety pin-like brooches used to fasten clothing, became particularly elaborate during the Hallstatt period and served as markers of regional identity and social status. Different regions developed distinctive fibula types that reflected local artistic traditions while participating in broader cultural exchanges. The evolution of fibula styles provides archaeologists with sensitive chronological indicators and evidence for cultural interaction patterns across the Hallstatt world. The Hallstatt period witnessed the emergence of wheeled vehicles as status symbols and practical transportation tools, with elaborate examples appearing in elite burials throughout Central Europe. These vehicles range from simple two-wheeled carts to sophisticated four-wheeled wagons decorated with bronze fittings and artistic elements. The technical knowledge required for wheel and axle construction, combined with the organizational capacity needed for road maintenance and vehicle operation, indicated substantial technological advancement and social coordination. The sophisticated burial practices and material culture of the late Hallstatt period provided the foundation for one of Europe's most distinctive and influential artistic traditions. Around 450 BC, a revolutionary aesthetic emerged in the workshops of Celtic craftsmen that would fundamentally transform European decorative arts for the next 4 centuries. This new style, first identified at the Swiss site of Latène on the shores of Lake Neuchâtel, represented far more than a simple evolution of earlier Hallstatt motifs. It embodied a complete reimagining of artistic expression that combined indigenous European traditions with influences absorbed from Mediterranean, Scythian, and Oriental sources through the extensive trade networks that connected Celtic communities across the continent. The Latin art style manifested most dramatically in metalwork, where Celtic smiths developed techniques that pushed bronze and iron, working to unprecedented levels of sophistication. The earliest examples appeared in the Rhineland and eastern France around 450 BC, featuring flowing curvilinear designs that seemed to pulse with organic energy. Unlike the geometric precision that characterized earlier Hallstatt decoration, Latin artists embraced asymmetry and movement, creating compositions that appeared to grow and transform before the viewer's eyes. These designs incorporated sophisticated mathematical principles, including complex spiral constructions and interlaced patterns that demonstrated advanced geometric understanding while maintaining an impression of natural spontaneity. Celtic metalworkers achieved their most spectacular effects through the development of innovative surface treatment techniques. They mastered the art of creating contrasting textures on bronze surfaces, combining areas of high polish with deliberately roughened sections that caught light differently. Coral inlay became a signature element of early Latin decoration, with Mediterranean coral carefully shaped and fitted into bronze recesses to create striking red accents against the golden bronze background. The technical challenges involved in this work required precise cutting of both bronze and coral, followed by mechanical attachment methods that ensured durability while maintaining aesthetic impact. The famous Vogelgesheim chariot burial from the Rhineland, dating to approximately 320 BC, exemplified the mature Latin style at its most accomplished. The bronze fittings from this burial featured flowing tendril designs that seemed to emerge organically from the metal surface, with each element connecting seamlessly to the next in an endless dance of curves and countercurves. The craftsmen who created these pieces demonstrated complete mastery of their medium, using variations in line weight and surface texture to create designs that appeared three-dimensional despite being executed in low relief. Zoomorphic elements played crucial roles in Latin artistic vocabulary, though Celtic artists rarely attempted naturalistic representation. Instead, they developed a sophisticated system of stylized animal motifs that could be combined, transformed, and abstracted to create complex decorative programs. Birds, particularly waterfowl and raptors, appeared frequently in Latin designs, often reduced to essential elements like curved beaks, prominent eyes, or characteristic wing shapes that could be incorporated into larger compositional schemes. These avian motifs sometimes underwent such extreme stylization that they became purely abstract elements, recognizable only to viewers familiar with the artistic tradition's symbolic language. Human faces emerged as another characteristic Latin motif, typically rendered in a distinctive style that emphasized large, staring eyes and prominent facial features. These faces often appeared to emerge from or dissolve into surrounding decorative elements, creating an unsettling effect that suggested the presence of supernatural beings or deities. The technical execution of these facial representations required considerable skill, as the artists had to maintain recognizable human characteristics while integrating them seamlessly into complex decorative schemes that might include plant motifs, geometric patterns, and abstract elements. The development of Champlevé enameling techniques during the later Latin period represented one of the most significant technological innovations in European decorative arts. This process involved cutting recessed areas into bronze surfaces, then filling these depressions with powdered glass that was fused in place through controlled heating. Celtic enamelers developed a distinctive palette dominated by red, blue, and yellow colours that created striking contrasts against bronze backgrounds. The technical challenges of Champlevé work required precise temperature control and timing, as overheating could damage both the enamel and the underlying bronze, while insufficient heat failed to achieve proper fusion. Regional variations in La Tène artistic traditions reflected the diverse cultural influences and local preferences that characterize Celtic Europe. The plastic style, which emerged in the Rhineland during the 4th century BC, emphasized three-dimensional modelling and bold relief work that created dramatic light and shadow effects. Craftsmen working in this tradition developed techniques for creating deeply undercut decorative elements that appeared to float above the surface of their bronze substrates. These pieces required extensive hand finishing and represented enormous investments of skilled labour time. British La Tène art developed its own distinctive characteristics following the Celtic migrations to the British Isles during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. Insular Celtic artists showed particular interest in trumpet spirals and complex interlace patterns that would later influence medieval manuscript illumination. The famous Battersea shield, recovered from the Thames and dating to approximately 350 BC, demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of compositional balance that characterized British La Tène work. This bronze shield boss featured 3 circular panels connected by flowing curves, with each panel containing intricate spiral designs executed in repousse technique. The Snettisham Torques from Norfolk represented the pinnacle of British Celtic goldworking, with the Great Torque weighing over 1 kilogram and featuring twisted gold cables, terminated by elaborate decorated terminals. The construction of these massive neck ornaments required advanced knowledge of gold working techniques, including the ability to create consistent twisted cables from multiple gold wires, and the skill to attach heavy terminals without compromising structural integrity. The decorative programs on the terminals incorporated classical La Tène motifs adapted to British tastes, with particular emphasis on flowing curves and stylized plant forms. Celtic expansion across Europe during the La Tène period represented one of the most remarkable demographic and cultural movements in European prehistory. Beginning around 400 BC, Celtic populations spread from their Central European heartlands in all directions, establishing new settlements and cultural zones that extended from the Atlantic coasts of Iberia and Ireland to the steppes of Asia Minor. This expansion was not a single coordinated migration, but rather a complex series of population movements driven by various factors including demographic pressure, economic opportunities, political conflicts, and the search for new agricultural lands. The Celtic settlement of northern Italy, known to classical authors as Gallia Cisalpina, began during the early 4th century BC and profoundly altered the political and cultural landscape of the Po Valley. Celtic tribes including the Boii, Senones and Lingones established substantial settlements throughout the region, displacing or absorbing earlier Etruscan and Italic populations. Archaeological evidence from sites like Monte Bibele reveals the rapid adoption of La Tène material culture alongside the maintenance of certain local traditions, suggesting complex processes of cultural interaction rather than simple replacement. The sack of Rome in 387 BC by Brennus and his Celtic warriors marked a dramatic demonstration of Celtic military capabilities and political organisation. Classical sources describe the terror that Celtic armies inspired among Mediterranean populations, with their distinctive warfare practices, impressive physical stature, and unfamiliar cultural traditions. The psychological impact of Celtic military success extended far beyond the immediate political consequences, contributing to the development of classical stereotypes about barbarian peoples that would influence European cultural attitudes for centuries. Celtic expansion into the Balkans during the 3rd century BC brought Celtic populations into contact with Thracian, Illyrian, and Greek cultures, creating new hybrid cultural zones that blended Celtic traditions with local practices. The Celtic settlement at Varna on the Black Sea coast established a significant trading centre that connected Celtic Europe with the broader Black Sea commercial network. Archaeological evidence from Balkan Celtic sites reveals the adoption of local pottery styles, alongside the maintenance of distinctive Celtic metalworking traditions and burial practices. The most distant Celtic expansion reached Asia Minor, where Celtic tribes known as Galatians established permanent settlements in central Anatolia during the 3rd century BC. These communities maintained their Celtic identity for centuries, developing distinctive cultural traditions that combined Celtic, Greek, and Anatolian elements. The Galatian settlement at Gordion revealed extensive evidence of Latin material culture adapted to local conditions, including characteristic Celtic fibulae manufactured using local materials and techniques. Atlantic Celtic expansion encompassed the settlement of Ireland and the establishment of Celtic communities along the Atlantic coasts of France, Spain, and Portugal. The Irish Sea region became a major zone of Celtic cultural development, with communities in Ireland, Wales, and Scotland developing distinctive artistic traditions that drew upon Latin motifs, while incorporating local preferences and influences. The Turo stone in County Galway exemplified this insular Celtic artistic tradition, featuring flowing Latin-style decoration carved in granite that demonstrated the adaptation of metalworking motifs to stone sculpture. The development of oppida represented one of the most significant urbanization processes in prehistoric Europe, marking the emergence of substantial fortified settlements that served as political, economic, and cultural centres for Celtic communities. These proto-urban centres appeared across Celtic Europe during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, featuring sophisticated defensive systems, planned internal layouts, and evidence of specialised craft production and long-distance trade activities. The term oppidum was coined by Julius Caesar to describe these settlements, though modern archaeological investigation has revealed their complexity far exceeded classical understanding. Bibracte, located on Montbeuvray in Burgundy, represented one of the most extensively studied oppidae, and demonstrated the sophisticated urban planning that characterised these settlements. The site covered approximately 135 hectares and was defended by a massive stone wall constructed using the Murus Gallicus technique described by Caesar. This defensive system combined stone facing with internal timber framework and rubble fill, creating walls that could absorb the impact of Roman siege engines while maintaining structural integrity. The internal organisation of Bibracte revealed distinct quarters for different activities, including residential areas, craft workshops, and public spaces that suggested complex social organisation and administrative systems. Archaeological excavations at Bibracte uncovered extensive evidence of specialised craft production, including bronze working, iron smithing, glass making, and ceramic production. The scale and sophistication of these activities indicated production for both local consumption and long-distance trade, with finished goods distributed across extensive networks that connected Celtic communities throughout Gaul and beyond. The presence of imported Mediterranean goods, including wine amphorae, fine pottery, and luxury items, demonstrated the integration of oppida into broader European and Mediterranean commercial systems. Manching, located on the Danube in Bavaria, represented the largest known Celtic oppidum, covering approximately 380 hectares and supporting an estimated population of 5,000, 10,000 inhabitants. The settlement's defensive perimeter stretched for over 7 kilometres and incorporated natural topographic features with artificial fortifications to create an imposing defensive system. Internal organisation at Manching revealed sophisticated planning, with distinct areas designated for residential occupation, craft production, religious activities, and administrative functions. The iron production facilities at Manching operated on an industrial scale, with archaeological evidence revealing hundreds of smelting furnaces and extensive slag deposits that indicated production far exceeding local needs. The technical sophistication of Manching's metalworking operations included the use of water-powered machinery for ore processing and bellows operation, representing some of the earliest applications of hydraulic technology in European manufacturing. The standardization of iron products from Manching suggested systematic quality control and production management that approached industrial organization levels. Entremont, located near modern Aix-en-Provence, exemplified the Oppida tradition in Mediterranean Gaul and revealed the complex cultural interactions that characterized Celtic communities in contact with Greek and Roman influences. The settlement featured distinctive architectural traditions that combined Celtic building techniques with Mediterranean influences, including the use of stone construction and urban planning principles derived from Greek colonial models. The famous sculpted heads from Entremont demonstrated the development of Celtic monumental art traditions that incorporated classical influences while maintaining distinctive Celtic aesthetic preferences. The religious practices and Dritic traditions that characterized Celtic society during the La Tène period represented complex systems of belief and ritual that integrated natural phenomena, ancestral veneration, and sophisticated philosophical concepts. Classical authors, particularly Caesar and Pliny, provided detailed accounts of Druidic practices, though their observations were filtered through Roman cultural perspectives and political agendas. Archaeological evidence from Celtic religious sites reveals the material aspects of these practices, while confirming many classical observations about the importance of natural settings and ritual deposits in Celtic religious life. Sacred groves and springs played central roles in Celtic religious practices, with natural features serving as focal points for community rituals and individual devotional activities. The sanctuary at Gournay-sur-Aronde in northern France revealed the archaeological signature of Celtic religious practices through extensive deposits of weapons, jewellery and animal remains that had been deliberately destroyed and deposited in ritual contexts. The systematic nature of these deposits, with weapons bent or broken before deposition and organic materials carefully arranged in specific patterns, demonstrated the sophisticated ritual protocols that governed Celtic religious activities. Ritual deposits in rivers and lakes provided dramatic evidence of Celtic religious practices and the importance of water in Celtic cosmology. The La Tène site itself yielded hundreds of iron weapons, tools and ornaments that had been deposited in Lake Neuchâtel over several centuries, creating an enormous votive assemblage that demonstrated the scale of Celtic ritual activities. Similar deposits from sites across Celtic Europe, including Llyn Cerrig Bach in Wales and the Thames in England, reveal consistent patterns of ritual deposition that transcended regional cultural boundaries. Human sacrifice, documented by classical authors and confirmed by archaeological evidence, represented one of the most controversial aspects of Celtic religious practices. The bog bodies discovered across northern Europe, including Lindo man from England and Tolland man from Denmark, provided physical evidence of ritual killing that corresponded to classical descriptions of Druidic practices. The careful preservation of these individuals in acidic bog environments revealed details of their final moments, including evidence of multiple killing methods that suggested ritualized execution rather than simple murder or execution. The role of oral tradition in Celtic society extended far beyond religious instruction to encompass legal codes, historical narratives, genealogical records, and technical knowledge that bound communities together across vast geographic distances. Druids served as the primary custodians of this oral tradition, undergoing extensive training periods that could last 20 years or more. The complexity and volume of information maintained through oral transmission demonstrated sophisticated mnemonic techniques and educational systems that preserved cultural knowledge across generations without written records. Celtic legal traditions, preserved in later Irish and Welsh texts but reflecting earlier practices, revealed sophisticated systems of customary law that regulated everything from property rights to personal relationships. These legal codes demonstrated the complexity of Celtic social organisation and the importance of precedent and tradition in maintaining social order. The role of Druids as legal authorities extended their influence beyond religious matters to encompass virtually every aspect of community life, creating powerful institutional frameworks that transcended individual tribal boundaries. The sophisticated Celtic cultural networks that dominated much of Central and Western Europe during the La Tène period coexisted with equally complex but distinctly different societies developing across the northern European plains and Scandinavian peninsula. These Germanic-speaking populations, while sharing certain technological traditions with their Celtic neighbours, evolved unique social structures, religious practices and material cultures that reflected their adaptation to different environmental conditions and historical circumstances. The archaeological record reveals that Germanic societies were far from the primitive barbarian groups described in Roman propaganda. Instead, they represented sophisticated tribal confederations with advanced metallurgical knowledge, extensive trade networks, and complex political organizations that would eventually reshape the entire European continent. The territorial organization of Germanic peoples during the early Iron Age reflected a sophisticated understanding of landscape management and resource exploitation that maximized both defensive capabilities and economic productivity. Unlike the centralized oppida system favored by Celtic communities, Germanic settlements typically consisted of dispersed farmsteads and small villages connected through kinship networks and seasonal gathering places. These settlement patterns reflected both environmental constraints and cultural preferences, as the northern European landscape of forests, wetlands and river valleys required different organizational strategies than the more open terrain of Central Europe. The Cimbrian Teutones, first documented through their dramatic confrontations with Roman armies during the late 2nd century BC, exemplified the military potential and organizational complexity of Germanic tribal confederations. Archaeological evidence from their probable homeland in Jutland reveals sophisticated agricultural systems that supported substantial populations despite challenging environmental conditions. The bog reclamation projects undertaken by these communities demonstrated advanced hydraulic engineering knowledge, with wooden trackways, drainage channels, and field systems that transformed marginal wetlands into productive agricultural areas. The Suebi Confederation, described by Tacitus as the most powerful Germanic grouping, controlled vast territories along the Rhine and Danube frontiers and maintained complex relationships with both Celtic neighbours and Roman authorities. Archaeological investigations at sites like Haarhausen in Thuringia have revealed the material signature of Suebi communities, including distinctive pottery styles, metalworking traditions, and burial practices that reflected their unique cultural identity. The Suebi political organisation incorporated multiple sub-tribes under loose confederate leadership, allowing for coordinated military actions while maintaining local autonomy in most internal affairs. The Cherusci, immortalised through their leader Arminius and the destruction of 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest, demonstrated the sophisticated military organisation and tactical knowledge that characterised mature Germanic societies. Their homeland in the Weser River Valley provided strategic advantages for controlling trade routes between the North Sea and Central European networks, while the extensive forest cover offered defensive positions that negated Roman military advantages. Archaeological evidence from Cherusci territory reveals substantial settlements with evidence of craft specialization and long-distance trade connections that supported their political and military activities. The bog bodies discovered throughout northern Europe provide extraordinary insight into Germanic religious practices, social structures and judicial systems that would otherwise remain invisible in the archaeological record. The acidic conditions of peat bogs create unique preservation environments where organic materials, including human tissue, textiles, and wooden artifacts, survive intact for millennia. These discoveries offer unparalleled opportunities to examine the physical remains of individuals who lived during the Germanic Iron Age, revealing details about their daily lives, social status, and the circumstances of their deaths. Tolland Man, discovered in a Danish peat bog in 1950, represents perhaps the most famous and well-preserved example of these ritual deposits. Radiocarbon dating placed his death around 400–200 BC during the height of Germanic Iron Age development. The extraordinary preservation allowed detailed analysis of his physical condition, revealing that he was approximately 40 years old at death and had consumed a final meal consisting of barley, linseed, and various wild seeds. The presence of ergot, a fungal parasite that grows on grain and produces hallucinogenic compounds, suggested possible ritual consumption of psychoactive substances before his death. The manner of Tolland Man's death provided crucial evidence about Germanic judicial and religious practices. The leather rope around his neck indicated death by hanging, while the careful positioning of his body in the bog suggested ritual deposition rather than simple disposal. His peaceful facial expression and the gentle placement of his limbs indicated that the body had been treated with reverence after death, supporting interpretations that link bog body deposits to religious sacrifice rather than criminal punishment. The high-quality leather cap found with the body suggested that he held significant social status, challenging assumptions that sacrifice victims were typically drawn from marginal social groups. Grauballer Man, discovered in another Danish bog in 1952, provided additional evidence for the complexity of bog body phenomena and their relationship to Germanic social structures. Dating to approximately 290 BC, this individual showed evidence of a violent death involving throat cutting and blunt force trauma to the skull. However, like Tolland Man, his body was carefully positioned in the bog and showed no signs of struggle or binding, suggesting that he participated willingly in the ritual that led to his death or was already deceased when deposited. The analysis of Grauballer Man's stomach contents revealed a final meal similar to that consumed by Tolland Man, consisting of various grains and wild plants that suggested a specific ritual diet associated with sacrifice or judicial execution. The presence of parasitic worms indicated that he suffered from intestinal infections common in Iron Age populations, while his hands showed evidence of manual labour that suggested he was not from the higher social classes. These details provide valuable insights into the health conditions and daily life experiences of ordinary Germanic people during this period. The distribution of bog bodies across northern Europe reveals patterns that correspond to territorial boundaries and cultural zones identified through other archaeological evidence. The concentration of finds in Denmark, northern Germany, and the Netherlands suggests that bog deposition was a particularly important practice among North Sea Germanic groups, while the relative scarcity of such finds in other Germanic territories indicates regional variations in religious and judicial practices. The chronological distribution shows peak activity during the Roman Iron Age, suggesting possible connections between bog body deposition and periods of external pressure or internal social stress. The textiles preserved with bog bodies provide exceptional evidence for Germanic clothing traditions and textile production techniques. Tolland Man's leather cap demonstrated sophisticated leatherworking skills, with careful stitching and shaping that created a durable and weather-resistant garment. Other bog body finds included woolen cloaks, linen undergarments, and leather shoes that revealed the range of materials and techniques available to Germanic craftsmen. The quality of these textiles often exceeded expectations based on classical descriptions of barbarian peoples, demonstrating that Germanic communities possessed advanced textile production capabilities. Germanic weapon technology during the Iron Age reflected both indigenous innovations and selective adoption of techniques from neighbouring cultures, resulting in distinctive military traditions that proved highly effective against Roman forces. The development of specialised weapon types adapted to Germanic fighting styles and tactical preferences created military advantages that compensated for Roman superiority in armour, siege equipment, and organisational discipline. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits, burials, and battlefield sites reveals the sophisticated metallurgical knowledge and strategic thinking that characterised Germanic military culture. The spatha, a long double-edged sword that became characteristic of Germanic warriors, represented a significant departure from earlier Celtic and Roman sword traditions. Archaeological examples from sites like Nidum in Denmark reveal spatha blades measuring 85 centimetres in length, substantially longer than contemporary Roman gladii or Celtic latene swords. This increased length provided tactical advantages in Germanic fighting styles that emphasised individual combat skills and the ability to engage opponents at greater distances. The construction techniques employed in spatha production demonstrated advanced understanding of steel properties with pattern-welded blades that combined different iron and steel components to create weapons that balance flexibility with cutting performance. Pattern welding, the technique used to create distinctive decorative patterns in Germanic sword blades, required sophisticated metallurgical knowledge and represented one of the highest achievements of Iron Age European metalworking. The process involved forge welding together rods of iron and steel with different carbon contents, then twisting and folding the resulting composite to create complex patterns that appeared as serpentine or herringbone designs when the blade surface was polished and etched. The technical challenges of pattern welding required precise temperature control and timing, as improper heating could ruin hours of careful preparation work. The Francisca, a distinctive throwing axe that became synonymous with Germanic warfare, demonstrated the innovative approach that characterized Germanic weapon development. Archaeological examples reveal carefully balanced implements with curved handles and asymmetrical blade profiles optimized for both throwing accuracy and close combat effectiveness. The metallurgical analysis of Francisca heads shows sophisticated understanding of steel treatment, with hard cutting edges welded to softer, more resilient cores that could absorb impact shock without fracturing. The tactical employment of Francisci in combination with shields and spears created integrated weapon systems that maximized Germanic advantages in mobility and individual fighting skills. Shield construction among Germanic warriors reflected both practical defensive requirements and cultural preferences for mobility and individual expression. Archaeological evidence from bog deposits and burials reveals shields constructed from wooden planks or leather stretched over wooden frames, typically measuring 90 centimetres in diameter. The organic materials used in shield construction have rarely survived, but metal shield bosses and rim fittings provide evidence for construction techniques and decorative traditions. Germanic shields were generally lighter than Roman scuta, reflecting tactical preferences for mobility and individual maneuverability over formation fighting. Shield wall formations, documented in later historical sources but evidenced archaeologically through weapon deposit patterns and battlefield archaeology, represented sophisticated tactical innovations that maximized Germanic defensive capabilities. These formations required extensive training and coordination to maintain effectiveness against cavalry charges or infantry assaults, suggesting that Germanic warriors possessed higher levels of military discipline than classical sources typically acknowledged. The archaeological evidence for standardized weapon types and consistent metallurgical techniques across wide geographic areas supports interpretations that emphasize the organizational sophistication of Germanic military systems. The extensive trade relationships that connected Germanic communities with the Roman Empire created complex networks of cultural and economic exchange that profoundly influenced both Germanic and Roman societies. Archaeological evidence reveals that these relationships extended far beyond simple frontier commerce to encompass sophisticated diplomatic arrangements, cultural exchanges, and technological transfers that shaped the development of both civilizations. The amber routes that connected the Baltic Sea with Mediterranean markets provided the foundation for many of these relationships, creating wealth flows that supported the political and military development of Germanic tribal confederations. Amber, fossilized tree resin prized throughout the ancient world for its beauty and supposed magical properties, represented Northern Europe's most valuable export commodity and provided Germanic communities with the economic foundation for extensive trade networks. The primary sources of amber lay along the Baltic coastlines of modern Denmark, Poland, and the Baltic states, where storms regularly deposited amber fragments on beaches where they could be collected by local populations. The processing of raw amber into finished jewellery and decorative objects required specialised knowledge and tools, creating craft specialisations that supported professional artisan communities. The amber routes that carried this precious commodity southward to Mediterranean markets followed several distinct pathways that connected Germanic territories with Roman commercial networks. The eastern route followed the Vistula River valley through modern Poland, connecting Baltic sources with the Danube River system and ultimately reaching the Black Sea and Mediterranean markets. Archaeological evidence from sites along this route reveals substantial Germanic settlements that prospered through their control of amber transportation and processing, developing sophisticated material cultures that combined local traditions with influences absorbed through long-distance trade. The Western Amber route followed the Rhine River Valley, connecting North Sea Germanic communities with Roman frontier markets and ultimately with Mediterranean consumers. Archaeological investigations at sites like Haarhausen and Feddersen-Weerde reveal the material signature of communities that participated in this trade, including Roman coins, luxury goods, and technological innovations that arrived through commercial exchange. The scale of amber working at these sites, evidenced by substantial quantities of amber debris and specialized tools, indicates production levels far exceeding local consumption needs. Roman luxury goods found in Germanic contexts provide evidence for the sophisticated consumer preferences and social hierarchies that characterized Germanic societies during the Iron Age. Bronze vessels, glass beakers, fine pottery, and silver ornaments appear regularly in Germanic burials and settlement contexts, demonstrating both the wealth available to Germanic elites and their familiarity with Roman material culture. The selective adoption of Roman goods, with certain types appearing frequently while others remain rare, suggests that Germanic consumers made conscious choices about which foreign products to incorporate into their own cultural systems. The cultural exchange facilitated by trade relationships extended beyond material goods to encompass technological knowledge, artistic influences, and possibly religious ideas that shaped the development of both Germanic and Roman societies. Germanic metalworking techniques influenced Roman military equipment, while Roman construction methods appeared in Germanic fortifications and settlements. The adoption of Roman coinage by some Germanic communities provided evidence for the integration of Germanic economies into broader European commercial systems, while the continued production of traditional Germanic goods demonstrated the selective nature of cultural adoption. The Rhine and Danube frontiers, established by Augustus and maintained by his successors, created zones of intensive cultural interaction that profoundly influenced both Roman and Germanic societies. Archaeological evidence from frontier regions reveals complex patterns of settlement, trade, and cultural exchange that challenge traditional assumptions about barbarian Roman relationships. Rather than simple military boundaries separating civilized Romans from barbarian Germans, these frontiers functioned as permeable membranes that facilitated extensive interaction while maintaining political and military distinctions. Roman military installations along the Germanic frontiers created markets for Germanic goods and services while providing Germanic communities with access to Roman technology and cultural innovations. Archaeological investigations at sites like Calcrese, identified as the probable location of the Varian disaster, reveal evidence for extensive Germanic-Roman interaction prior to the famous battle. Germanic pottery appears in Roman contexts, while Roman military equipment shows up in Germanic settlements. suggesting routine commercial and possibly diplomatic exchanges that preceded military confrontations. The auxiliary recruitment practices employed by Roman armies created additional channels for Germanic-Roman cultural exchange, as Germanic warriors served in Roman military units stationed throughout the empire. These individuals gained direct experience with Roman military techniques, administrative systems, and cultural practices, knowledge that they carried back to their home communities when their service terms expired. The archaeological evidence for Roman military equipment and techniques in Germanic contexts often reflects this type of knowledge transfer, rather than simple commercial exchange or military capture. The complex web of trade relationships and cultural exchanges that had developed between Germanic tribes and Roman frontier communities provided valuable intelligence networks that would prove crucial during the systematic Roman conquest of Celtic Gaul. By 225 BC, Roman expansion had already brought legions into direct contact with Celtic populations in northern Italy, where the Gallia Cisalpina campaigns demonstrated both the military potential of Celtic warriors and their ultimate vulnerability to Roman tactical discipline and siege warfare capabilities. The lessons learned during these early encounters shaped Roman strategic thinking and military preparations for the far more ambitious conquest campaigns that would follow in Transalpine Gaul. The Gallic Wars initiated by Julius Caesar in 58 BC represented the culmination of decades of Roman intelligence gathering, diplomatic maneuvering, and strategic planning that had gradually prepared the ground for systematic conquest. Caesar's decision to intervene in Gallic affairs was not an impulsive act of personal ambition, but rather the execution of a carefully considered strategy that exploited existing divisions within Celtic society while advancing broader Roman imperial objectives. The migration of the Helvetii provided the immediate pretext for Roman intervention, but Caesar's subsequent actions revealed long-term planning that encompassed the complete subjugation of Celtic Gaul and its integration into the Roman provincial system. The Helvetii migration crisis of 58 BC offered Caesar an ideal opportunity to establish Roman military presence in Gaul, while appearing to respond to legitimate security concerns. Archaeological evidence from Swiss plateau sites reveals the scale of Helvetii preparations for their planned migration, including the systematic destruction of settlements and the accumulation of supplies necessary for moving an estimated 368,000 people according to Caesar's figures. The logistics involved in such a massive population movement required sophisticated organizational capabilities and demonstrated the administrative complexity that characterized mature Celtic societies. Caesar's initial confrontation with the Helvetii at Bibracte showcased Roman tactical superiority, while revealing the continuing military effectiveness of Celtic warriors when properly organized and motivated. The battle demonstrated Caesar's ability to adapt Roman military techniques to Gallic conditions, employing flexible formations and rapid maneuvers that neutralized traditional Celtic advantages in individual combat skills and battlefield mobility. The systematic pursuit and destruction of Helvetii forces that followed the battle established patterns of Roman military conduct that would characterize the entire Gallic campaign. The Ariovistus campaign of 58 BC brought Roman forces into direct confrontation with Germanic tribal confederations that had established themselves west of the Rhine, creating the first major test of Roman capabilities against Germanic military systems. Ariovistus, king of the Suebi Confederation, had been invited into Gaul by the Sequani to assist in their conflicts with the Aedui, demonstrating the complex diplomatic relationships that connected Celtic and Germanic political systems. The subsequent Germanic settlement in Alsace created a strategic threat that Caesar could not ignore, as it established Germanic control over crucial trade routes and provided a potential base for further expansion into Roman client territories. The confrontation with Ariovistus revealed significant differences between Celtic and Germanic military traditions that would influence Roman strategic planning throughout the conquest period. Germanic warriors employed different weapon systems, fighting techniques, and tactical formations than their Celtic counterparts, requiring Roman commanders to develop new approaches for each type of opponent. The psychological warfare employed by Germanic forces, including their reputation for ferocity and their unfamiliar cultural practices, initially created morale problems among Roman troops that Caesar had to address through careful leadership and tactical adjustments. The Belgae campaigns of 57 BC encountered the most formidable military opposition that Roman forces would face during the entire Gallic conquest, as the Belgian tribal confederation possessed both the organisational sophistication of mature Celtic societies and military traditions adapted to constant warfare with Germanic neighbours. The Belgae had developed defensive strategies specifically designed to counter Roman siege techniques, including the construction of fortified positions in marshy terrain that negated Roman engineering advantages and forced legions to fight under unfavourable conditions. The siege of the Nervii stronghold at Sabis demonstrated the tactical innovations that Belgian tribes had developed to exploit weaknesses in Roman military systems. The Nervii employed sophisticated battlefield intelligence networks that allowed them to time their attacks precisely when Roman forces were most vulnerable during river crossings and camp construction. Their assault nearly succeeded in destroying Caesar's army, saved only by Caesar's personal intervention and the disciplined response of veteran legionaries who managed to maintain formation cohesion despite the surprise attack. The Aduatuci siege that concluded the Belgian campaign revealed the advanced fortification techniques that Celtic communities had developed during centuries of intertribal warfare. The Aduatuci oppidum featured multiple defensive lines with integrated obstacles and killing zones that maximised defensive advantages while minimising the garrison requirements necessary to maintain effective resistance. Roman siege techniques required substantial modification to overcome these defences, including the construction of specialised siege equipment adapted to local terrain conditions and defensive innovations. The first Germanic expedition across the Rhine in 55 BC represented Caesar's most audacious military undertaking and demonstrated Roman engineering capabilities that astonished both allies and enemies throughout the European continent. The construction of a timber bridge across the Rhine in just 10 days required advanced engineering knowledge and massive organisational capabilities that showcased Roman technological superiority. Archaeological investigations along the Rhine have identified probable locations for this bridge, revealing the scale of engineering work necessary to span one of Europe's major rivers using only timber and iron construction techniques. The strategic objectives of the Rhine crossing extended far beyond simple military demonstration to encompass complex diplomatic and intelligence-gathering missions that advanced Roman understanding of Germanic political systems and military capabilities. Caesar's forces conducted systematic reconnaissance of Germanic territories, gathering crucial intelligence about tribal boundaries, settlement patterns, and military organisations that would prove valuable during future campaigns. The psychological impact of Roman forces operating east of the Rhine created lasting impressions among Germanic populations about Roman military reach and technological capabilities. The first British expedition of 55 BC opened an entirely new theatre of operations that presented Roman forces with unprecedented logistical and tactical challenges. The English Channel crossing required the development of specialised naval capabilities and amphibious assault techniques that pushed Roman military engineering to its limits. Archaeological evidence from British coastal sites reveals the sophisticated defensive preparations that British Celtic communities had made in anticipation of Roman invasion, including the construction of beach obstacles and the positioning of cavalry forces to contest Roman landings. The British expeditions revealed significant differences between continental and insular Celtic societies that required Roman commanders to develop new tactical approaches and strategic objectives. British Celtic communities had evolved different settlement patterns, military traditions and political organisations that reflected their island environment and reduced contact with continental developments. The chariot warfare employed by British tribes had largely disappeared from continental Celtic military practice, requiring Roman forces to develop countermeasures for combat techniques they had not encountered since the early Republican period. The Second British Expedition of 54 BC demonstrated Roman ability to learn from previous experiences while adapting military techniques to new operational environments. The larger invasion force and improved naval equipment reflected systematic analysis of the previous year's challenges and the development of solutions that address specific problems identified during the initial campaign. The construction of specialised landing craft and the coordination of complex amphibious operations showcased Roman military flexibility and organisational capabilities. The Ambiorix rebellion of 53 BC represented the most serious challenge to Roman control in Gaul and demonstrated the continuing effectiveness of Celtic military leadership when properly organised and motivated. Ambiorix of the Eburones exploited Roman overconfidence and tactical predictability to achieve one of the most devastating defeats suffered by Roman forces during the entire conquest period. The destruction of Sabinus and Cotta's legions in the Ardennes forest revealed vulnerabilities in Roman military systems when operating in unfamiliar terrain against opponents who possessed superior local knowledge and tactical flexibility. The tactical innovations employed by Ambiorix during the Eburones campaign influenced resistance strategies throughout the remaining conquest period and provided models that other Celtic leaders would attempt to replicate. The use of false negotiations to lure Roman forces into vulnerable positions, the coordination of multiple tribal groups in sustained campaigns, and the employment of guerrilla warfare techniques that avoided direct confrontation with Roman tactical advantages all became standard elements of Celtic resistance strategy. The systematic destruction of Roman supply lines and the targeting of isolated garrisons demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Roman military vulnerabilities. The Roman response to the Ambiorix rebellion revealed the ruthless efficiency that characterized Roman pacification campaigns when their authority was directly challenged. Caesar's systematic devastation of Eburones' territory and the coordinated campaigns that eliminated the tribal confederation as a political entity established precedents for Roman treatment of rebellious populations. The employment of Germanic auxiliaries in anti-Celtic operations demonstrated Roman willingness to exploit intertribal rivalries, while providing Germanic warriors with opportunities to gain Roman military experience and equipment. The Great Gallic Rebellion of 52 BC under Vercingetorix represented the most sophisticated and coordinated resistance movement that Roman forces encountered during the entire conquest period. Vercingetorix succeeded in creating a pan-Gallic coalition that transcended traditional tribal boundaries and rivalries, demonstrating exceptional political and military leadership capabilities. The strategic planning that characterized the rebellion revealed the continuing vitality of Celtic political institutions and the potential for unified resistance when properly organized and motivated. Vercingetorix's background as a member of the Arverni elite provided him with extensive knowledge of Roman military capabilities and political systems that proved crucial in developing effective resistance strategies. His previous contacts with Roman commanders and his understanding of Roman tactical preferences allowed him to anticipate Roman responses and develop countermeasures that neutralized many traditional Roman advantages. The systematic preparation for rebellion, including the coordination of supply systems and the development of unified command structures, demonstrated sophisticated strategic planning capabilities. The scorched earth strategy employed by Vercingetorix during the early phases of the rebellion represented a fundamental departure from traditional Celtic warfare practices and demonstrated his understanding of Roman logistical vulnerabilities. The systematic destruction of settlements and food supplies in areas threatened by Roman advance forced Caesar's legions to operate under severe supply constraints while eliminating the resources that typically sustained Roman campaigns in enemy territory. This strategy required enormous sacrifices from participating communities and demonstrated the commitment that Vercingetorix had succeeded in generating among his followers. The siege of Gergovia in 52 BC represented Vercingetorix's greatest tactical success and demonstrated the effectiveness of Celtic defensive strategies when properly implemented. The Arverni capital's position on a volcanic plateau provided natural defensive advantages that Celtic engineers had enhanced through sophisticated fortification systems. The integration of natural topography with artificial defences created killing zones and obstacle systems that channeled Roman assault forces into predetermined defensive positions where Celtic advantages in individual combat skills could be maximised. The Gergovia campaign revealed significant limitations in Roman siege warfare capabilities when confronted with properly designed and defended Celtic fortifications. Caesar's forces struggled to establish effective siege lines around the elevated position while maintaining supply communications with their base camps. The Celtic defenders employed sophisticated counter-siege techniques, including the construction of sally ports and the coordination of external relief forces that threatened Roman siege, works from multiple directions simultaneously. The tactical defeats suffered by Roman forces at Gergovia represented one of Caesar's most serious military setbacks and demonstrated the continuing effectiveness of Celtic military capabilities when properly organised and employed. The coordinated Celtic assault that drove Roman forces from their advanced positions showcased the tactical flexibility and battlefield coordination that characterised mature Celtic military systems. The psychological impact of the defeat encouraged additional tribal groups to join the rebellion, while raising questions about Roman invincibility among previously neutral communities. The strategic withdrawal from Gergovia and the subsequent Roman campaign revealed Caesar's ability to adapt his strategic objectives in response to changing tactical circumstances. Rather than continuing the siege or attempting to restore Roman prestige through renewed assault, Caesar recognized that his strategic position required fundamental reassessment. The decision to abandon the siege while maintaining army cohesion demonstrated the tactical discipline and strategic flexibility that distinguished Roman military leadership from their Celtic opponents. The siege of Alesia represented the culmination of Roman military engineering capabilities and demonstrated the technological superiority that ultimately determined the outcome of the Gallic conquest. The construction of the double circumvallation around the Mandubi Oppidum showcased Roman engineering skills while creating a tactical situation that neutralized Celtic advantages in mobility and individual combat effectiveness. The scale of construction work involved in creating the siege lines required massive organizational capabilities and demonstrated Roman ability to coordinate complex engineering projects under combat conditions. The circumvallation at Alesia consisted of an inner ring of fortifications designed to contain the Celtic garrison while preventing breakout attempts, and an outer ring constructed to defend Roman forces against the anticipated relief army. Archaeological investigations at the site have revealed the sophisticated engineering techniques employed in construction, including the use of specialized obstacles, integrated defensive positions, and coordinated fields of fire that maximized Roman defensive capabilities. The construction required approximately 60,000 Roman soldiers working continuously for several weeks while maintaining combat readiness against potential Celtic attacks. The obstacle systems incorporated into the Alesia fortifications demonstrated Roman military engineering at its most innovative and effective. The famous lilies, concealed pits containing sharpened stakes designed to impale attacking cavalry and infantry, were integrated with other defensive obstacles including abatis, chevaux de frise, and carefully constructed killing zones that channeled Celtic assault forces into predetermined defensive positions. These engineering innovations reflected centuries of Roman military experience adapted to the specific tactical challenges posed by Celtic warfare techniques. The coordination required to maintain the Alessia siege while simultaneously conducting operations against the relief army demonstrated Roman organisational capabilities that far exceeded anything available to Celtic military systems. Roman forces had to maintain siege discipline while preparing for major field battles, requiring complex logistical arrangements and tactical coordination that tested Roman military systems to their limits. The successful execution of these simultaneous operations showcased the institutional advantages that Roman military organisation provided over Celtic tribal confederations. The final battle at Alessia revealed the tactical innovations that Roman commanders had developed during the conquest campaigns to maximise their advantages while minimising Celtic strengths. The coordination of infantry, cavalry and engineering elements in integrated tactical systems demonstrated Roman military evolution in response to Celtic challenges. The employment of Germanic cavalry auxiliaries in coordination with Roman infantry formations created combined arms capabilities that Celtic forces could not match, despite their individual tactical skills and battlefield courage. The surrender of Vercingetorix and the collapse of organised Celtic resistance marked the end of independent Celtic political authority in Gaul, while beginning the complex process of Romanisation that would transform Celtic society over the following centuries. The systematic distribution of Celtic populations, the establishment of Roman administrative systems, and the integration of Celtic elites into Roman political structures demonstrated the sophisticated imperial policies that characterized Roman provincial administration. The transformation of Celtic oppidi into Roman civitates provided continuity of settlement while fundamentally altering the political and economic systems that governed daily life. The establishment of Roman colonies throughout conquered Gaul created centres of Roman culture and administration that served as focal points for the broader Romanisation process. These colonies, typically established at strategic locations that controlled important transportation routes or natural resources, provided models of Roman urban planning and architectural techniques that influenced surrounding Celtic communities. The integration of Roman legal systems, religious practices, and educational institutions gradually transformed Celtic cultural traditions, while preserving certain elements that proved compatible with Roman imperial objectives. The systematic integration of Celtic territories into Roman provincial administration created new strategic challenges along the empire's expanding eastern frontiers, where sophisticated Iron Age societies had developed independently of Mediterranean influences, while maintaining complex relationships with both Celtic and Germanic neighbours. Among these Eastern European peoples, none achieved greater political sophistication or posed more formidable military challenges to Roman expansion than the Dacian kingdoms that emerged in the Carpathian Basin during the 2nd century BC. These societies represented the culmination of centuries of cultural synthesis between indigenous Thracian populations, Celtic technological innovations, and Scythian political traditions, creating unique civilizations that combined advanced metallurgy with sophisticated fortification systems and complex religious practices. The territorial foundations of Dacian political power rested upon the strategic advantages provided by the Carpathian mountain system, which created natural defensive barriers while containing rich mineral resources that supported advanced metallurgical industries. The geological complexity of the Carpathian region provided Dacian communities with access to gold, silver, iron, and salt deposits that formed the economic foundation for political centralization and military expansion. Archaeological investigations throughout the region reveal extensive mining operations that employed sophisticated extraction techniques, including underground galleries supported by timber frameworks and drainage systems that allowed exploitation of deposits at considerable depths. The Orasti Mountains, located in the southern Carpathians of modern Romania, became the political and religious centre of Dacian civilization during the first centuries BC and AD. This mountainous region contained the highest concentration of Dacian fortified settlements, religious sanctuaries, and administrative centres that controlled the broader territorial confederation. The strategic positioning of these sites provided commanding views over the surrounding valleys, while offering multiple escape routes through mountain passes that could be defended by small forces against much larger armies. The integration of natural topographic advantages with sophisticated artificial fortifications created defensive systems that proved nearly impregnable when properly garrisoned and supplied. The rise of Burebista during the mid-1st century BC marked the beginning of systematic Dacian political centralization that transformed scattered tribal groups into a powerful territorial state capable of challenging Roman expansion. Burebista's political innovations drew upon both Celtic organisational models and indigenous Thracian traditions, creating hybrid governmental structures that balance central authority with local autonomy. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with his reign reveals the rapid standardisation of material culture across previously distinct regional groups, suggesting successful implementation of unified administrative systems that transcended traditional tribal boundaries. Burebista's territorial expansion encompassed regions from the Black Sea coast to the Middle Danube Valley, creating a Dacian confederation that controlled crucial trade routes, connecting northern European amber sources with Mediterranean markets. The systematic conquest and integration of neighbouring territories required military capabilities that far exceeded traditional tribal warfare, demonstrating Dacian development of professional military organisations and sophisticated logistical systems. Roman sources describe Dacian armies numbering in the tens of thousands, figures that archaeological evidence supports through the scale of fortification systems and settlement patterns that could only be maintained by substantial organised populations. The administrative systems developed under Burebista incorporated elements derived from contact with both Celtic and Hellenistic political traditions, while maintaining distinctively Dacian characteristics that reflected local cultural preferences and environmental conditions. The archaeological record reveals standardized pottery styles, metalworking techniques, and architectural traditions that spread rapidly across the expanded Dacian territories, suggesting coordinated policies designed to create cultural unity among diverse populations. The adoption of common measurement systems and craft production standards facilitated trade and administration while promoting the development of specialized manufacturing centers that served regional and long-distance markets. Religious innovations played crucial roles in Burebista's political consolidation, as he worked closely with the high priest Asinius to develop unified religious practices that transcended local traditions while incorporating elements from various cultural sources. The construction of massive religious complexes in the Orasti Mountains demonstrated the organisational capabilities and resource mobilisation that characterised the mature Dacian state. These sanctuaries combined indigenous Thracian religious traditions with architectural influences derived from Celtic and Greek sources, creating distinctive religious centres that served both spiritual and political functions within the expanding confederation. The fortification systems developed during Burebista's reign represented sophisticated adaptations of Celtic oppidum construction techniques to the specific topographic and strategic requirements of Carpathian mountain warfare. Dacian engineers developed distinctive construction methods that combined dry stone masonry with timber reinforcement systems, creating walls that could withstand both siege engines and seismic activity common in the geologically active Carpathian region. The integration of multiple defensive lines with natural obstacles created layered defensive systems that forced attacking armies to overcome successive barriers while exposing them to coordinated defensive fire from elevated positions. Sarmizegetusa Regia, the primary political and religious centre of the Dacian kingdom, exemplified the sophisticated urban planning and architectural achievement that characterised mature Dacian civilization. Located on a mountain plateau at an elevation of over 1,000 metres, the site combined natural defensive advantages with artificial fortifications that created one of the most formidable strongholds in ancient Europe. Archaeological excavations have revealed complex terracing systems that maximise the use of limited plateau space, while creating distinct functional areas for residential, administrative, religious and military activities. The sacred area at Sarmizegetusa Regia contained multiple religious structures that demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of astronomy and mathematics that characterised Dacian religious practices. The circular sanctuary, constructed from carefully fitted limestone blocks, featured precise astronomical alignments that allowed accurate determination of seasonal cycles and celestial events. The complexity of these calculations required advanced mathematical knowledge and sophisticated observational techniques that reflected centuries of accumulated scientific understanding. The integration of religious and scientific functions within unified architectural complexes demonstrated the holistic worldview that characterized Dacian intellectual culture. The residential areas at Sarmizegetusa Regia revealed the social stratification and craft specialization that characterized Dacian urban society. Elite residences featured sophisticated heating systems, decorative stonework, and architectural elements that combined local traditions with influences derived from contact with Greek and Roman architectural styles. The presence of specialized workshops for metalworking, pottery production, and textile manufacturing indicated the concentration of skilled craftsmen who served both local needs and long-distance trade networks. The standardization of production techniques and quality control measures suggested systematic organization of craft production under centralized administrative oversight. The water management systems at Sarmizegetusa Regia demonstrated advanced hydraulic engineering knowledge that enabled permanent occupation of the mountain plateau despite challenging environmental conditions. Dacian engineers constructed sophisticated aqueduct systems that transported water from distant mountain springs through carefully graded channels carved into solid rock. The distribution network within the settlement employed ceramic pipes and stone channels that delivered water to residential areas, workshops, and religious complexes while maintaining adequate pressure for fountain systems and ceremonial water features. The defensive systems protecting Sarmizegetusa Regia incorporated multiple concentric walls that created successive defensive barriers around the central plateau. The outer fortifications extended for several kilometres and included watchtowers, gates, and artillery positions that provided early warning of approaching enemies while controlling access routes through the surrounding mountains. The integration of natural and artificial obstacles created killing zones where defending forces could concentrate missile fire against attacking armies while remaining protected behind massive stone walls. The coordination required to construct and maintain these extensive fortifications demonstrated sophisticated military engineering capabilities and substantial resource mobilization. The network of fortified settlements throughout the Orasti Mountains created an integrated defensive system that protected the Dacian heartland while controlling access to crucial mountain passes and trade routes. Sites like Costesti Setetuie, Blidaru, and Piatra Rosii formed strategic strongpoints that could provide mutual support while maintaining independent defensive capabilities. The standardized construction techniques employed at these sites suggested coordinated planning and resource allocation that reflected centralized administrative control over defensive preparations. The positioning of these fortifications created overlapping fields of observation and communication that allowed rapid coordination of defensive responses to threats from multiple directions. The muros de secus construction technique employed throughout the Dacian fortification network represented a distinctive architectural innovation that combined indigenous building traditions with influences derived from contact with Mediterranean engineering practices. This technique involved the construction of massive walls using carefully fitted stone blocks held together without mortar, creating structures that could flex during seismic events without losing structural integrity. The integration of timber elements within the stone construction provided additional flexibility while creating internal frameworks that distributed structural loads more effectively than pure masonry construction. The economic foundations of Dacian political power rested upon sophisticated exploitation of the region's abundant natural resources, particularly the gold deposits that provided the wealth necessary to support professional armies and extensive construction projects. Archaeological evidence reveals large-scale mining operations that employed advanced extraction techniques, including hydraulic mining methods that used diverted streams to wash away overburden and expose gold-bearing gravels. The scale of these operations required substantial labour forces and sophisticated organisational systems that could coordinate mining, processing and transportation activities across extensive geographic areas. Dacian metallurgical techniques achieved remarkable sophistication in both precious metalworking and iron production, creating distinctive artistic traditions while supplying the weapons and tools necessary for military and economic activities. The discovery of elaborate gold artifacts from Dacian contexts reveals advanced techniques, including granulation, filigree work, and complex casting methods that produced jewellery and ceremonial objects of exceptional quality. The standardization of weights and measures employed in precious metal working suggests systematic organization of craft production under centralized oversight that ensured quality control and facilitated trade relationships. Iron production in Dacian territories employed furnace designs and smelting techniques that achieved high efficiency while producing steel of exceptional quality. Archaeological investigations at iron working sites reveal sophisticated understanding of ore preparation, fuel management and temperature control that allowed consistent production of high-carbon steel suitable for weapon manufacture. The development of specialized quenching and tempering techniques produced Dacian weapons that Roman sources acknowledged as superior to their own equipment in certain applications, particularly curved swords and battle axes that became characteristic of Dacian military equipment. The agricultural systems that supported Dacian urban centres and military forces demonstrated sophisticated understanding of mountain farming techniques and resource management strategies adapted to challenging environmental conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive terracing systems that maximize cultivated area while preventing soil erosion on steep mountain slopes. The integration of livestock management with crop production created sustainable agricultural systems that could support substantial populations despite the environmental constraints imposed by high-altitude locations and limited growing seasons. Trade relationships connected Dacian territories with broader European and Mediterranean commercial networks, creating wealth flows that supported political centralization while facilitating cultural exchange with neighbouring societies. Archaeological evidence reveals Dacian participation in long-distance trade networks that carried Dacian gold and crafted goods to markets throughout the Roman Empire while importing luxury goods, raw materials, and technological innovations that influenced local development. The standardization of weights and measures employed in Dacian commercial activities facilitated integration with broader trade networks while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. The reign of Decebalus, beginning around 87 AD, marked the final phase of independent Dacian political development and the emergence of direct confrontation with Roman imperial expansion. Decebalus inherited the political and military systems developed by his predecessors, while facing unprecedented challenges from Roman armies that possessed superior siege equipment and organizational capabilities. His political innovations focused on military reorganization and diplomatic initiatives designed to create anti-Roman coalitions among neighbouring peoples who shared concerns about Roman expansion. Military reforms implemented by Decebalus transformed Dacian armies from traditional tribal levies into professional military forces capable of sustained campaigns against Roman legions. The standardization of weapons and equipment, combined with systematic training programs and improved logistical systems, created Dacian military capabilities that posed serious challenges to Roman tactical superiority. Archaeological evidence reveals the mass production of standardized weapons and armor that equipped Dacian forces with consistent quality equipment while reducing manufacturing costs and supply requirements. The diplomatic initiatives pursued by Decebalus demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Roman imperial politics and the strategic value of coordinated resistance among Rome's enemies. Dacian diplomatic missions reached Germanic tribes along the Rhine and Danube frontiers, Sarmatian confederations in the Pontic steppes, and Parthian territories in the east, creating the potential for coordinated military actions that could force Rome to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. The archaeological evidence for increased trade and cultural exchange during this period suggests that these diplomatic efforts achieved substantial success in creating anti-Roman alliances. The First Dacian War, initiated by Trajan in 101 AD, represented the culmination of decades of increasing tension between the expanding Roman Empire and the Dacian kingdom that controlled crucial territories along the Danube frontier. Roman strategic planning for the campaign reflected systematic intelligence gathering and careful preparation that addressed the specific challenges posed by Dacian fortification systems and military capabilities. The construction of permanent bridges across the Danube and the establishment of forward supply bases demonstrated Roman commitment to sustained military operations that would achieve decisive results rather than temporary tactical victories. The Adamclissi monument, erected to commemorate Roman victory in the First Dacian campaign, provides detailed visual evidence for the weapons, tactics and equipment employed by both Roman and Dacian forces during the conflict. The sculptural reliefs reveal the distinctive Dacian military equipment, including the curved falx swords that proved particularly effective against Roman armour, scale armour systems that provided protection while maintaining mobility, and siege equipment that demonstrated Dacian engineering capabilities. The monument also documents the diverse auxiliary forces that supported Roman operations, including Germanic cavalry, Syrian archers, and Balearic slingers that provided specialized capabilities adapted to specific tactical requirements. The siege techniques employed during the Dacian Wars reveal the sophisticated engineering capabilities that both sides had developed for mountain warfare in challenging terrain. Roman siege equipment required substantial modifications to operate effectively in the mountainous terrain of the Carpathian region, while Dacian defensive innovations forced Roman engineers to develop new approaches for overcoming fortifications that incorporated natural topographic advantages. The archaeological evidence from siege sites reveals the scale of engineering work required on both sides, including massive earthworks, specialized siege equipment, and coordinated defensive systems that tested military engineering capabilities to their limits. The sophisticated engineering capabilities demonstrated during the Dacian Wars found their earliest parallels in the Iberian Peninsula, where indigenous Iron Age societies had developed equally impressive fortification systems and metallurgical traditions centuries before Roman legions crossed the Pyrenees. The rugged topography of the Iberian Peninsula created ideal conditions for the development of defensive settlements that rivaled the mountain strongholds of Dacia, while the region's abundant mineral resources supported advanced metalworking industries that produced weapons and tools of exceptional quality. The convergence of indigenous Iberian traditions with Celtic migrations from across the Pyrenees created unique cultural syntheses that would challenge Roman expansion for over 2 centuries. The Meseta Central, the vast plateau that dominates the interior of the Iberian Peninsula, became the heartland of Celtiberian culture during the 6th century BC, as Celtic populations migrating from Gaul encountered and gradually merged with indigenous Iberian communities. This cultural fusion created distinctive societies that combined Celtic organisational structures and technological traditions with Iberian architectural techniques and religious practices. The Castro settlements that emerged across the Meseta represented sophisticated adaptations to the harsh environmental conditions of the Central Plateau, featuring defensive systems that exploited natural topographic advantages while incorporating advanced engineering techniques derived from both cultural traditions. The Castro at Las Cogotas, located in the province of Avila, exemplified the architectural sophistication that characterized mature Celtiberian settlements. The site occupied a granite outcrop that provided commanding views over the surrounding plains, while offering natural defensive advantages that Celtiberian engineers enhanced through systematic fortification construction. The defensive walls, constructed using the distinctive Celtiberian technique of combining massive granite blocks with smaller stone fill, created barriers that could withstand both siege engines and the seismic activity common in the geologically active Iberian Peninsula. The integration of multiple defensive lines with natural obstacles created layered defensive systems that forced attacking armies to overcome successive barriers while exposing them to coordinated missile fire from elevated positions. The internal organisation of Las Cogotas revealed the social complexity that characterised Celtiberian urban centres, with distinct residential quarters that reflected social stratification while maintaining functional integration. Elite residences featured sophisticated architectural elements, including hypercaust heating systems adapted to local climatic conditions, decorative stonework that combined Celtic geometric motifs with indigenous Iberian artistic traditions, and specialised storage facilities that indicated participation in long-distance trade networks. The presence of extensive workshops for metalworking, pottery production, and textile manufacturing demonstrated the craft specialisation that supported both local consumption and regional exchange systems. The warrior culture that dominated Celtiberian society created distinctive military traditions that combined Celtic tactical innovations with indigenous Iberian fighting techniques, producing military systems that proved remarkably effective against both tribal enemies and Roman legions. Archaeological evidence from warrior burials reveals sophisticated weapon sets that included the characteristic falcata, a curved, single-edged sword that became synonymous with Iberian warfare, alongside Celtic-style spears, shields, and protective equipment that reflected the cultural synthesis that characterized Celtiberian material culture. The metallurgical analysis of these weapons reveals advanced steelworking techniques that produced blades of exceptional quality, with carbon content and heat treatment that created cutting implements superior to contemporary Roman weapons in many applications. The falcata represented the pinnacle of Iberian metallurgical achievement and demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of steel properties that characterized indigenous weapon-making traditions. The distinctive curved blade profile optimized cutting performance while maintaining structural integrity during combat, with the forward-weighted design providing devastating chopping power that could penetrate armour and shields. The construction technique employed in falcata production required advanced knowledge of steel composition and heat treatment, with the blade spine constructed from high-carbon steel, while the cutting edge incorporated even harder materials that maintained sharpness through extended combat use. The elaborate hilts and decorative elements that adorned high-status examples reveal the artistic sophistication that characterized Celtiberian metalworking traditions. The devotio, a ritual practice documented by Roman sources and evidenced archaeologically through distinctive burial patterns, represented one of the most distinctive aspects of Celtiberian warrior culture and demonstrated the religious beliefs that motivated their military activities. This practice involved warriors pledging their lives to their leaders through sacred oaths that bound them to fight to the death, rather than survive their commander's defeat. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals mass burials that correspond to classical descriptions of devotio practices, with warriors buried alongside their weapons and personal equipment in arrangements that suggested coordinated ritual suicide rather than death in conventional combat. The religious significance of devotio extended beyond simple military loyalty to encompass complex beliefs about honour, afterlife, and the relationship between mortal warriors and divine powers. Celtiberian religious practices incorporated elements derived from both Celtic and indigenous Iberian traditions, creating syncretic belief systems that emphasized warrior virtues while maintaining connections to ancestral spirits and natural forces. The archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the material signature of these practices, including weapon deposits in sacred locations, ritual destruction of military equipment, and burial practices that reflected beliefs about the warrior's journey to the afterlife. The territorial organization of Celtiberian society reflected the environmental constraints and strategic requirements imposed by the harsh conditions of the central Meseta, where scattered resources and defensive considerations required different organizational strategies than those employed in more favorable geographic regions. The network of Castro settlements created an integrated system that provided mutual support while maintaining local autonomy, with each settlement controlling surrounding agricultural areas and participating in broader confederate structures when external threats required coordinated responses. The archaeological evidence reveals standardized construction techniques and material culture that suggest systematic cooperation among settlements while maintaining distinct local identities and traditions. The agricultural systems that supported Celtiberian settlements demonstrated sophisticated adaptations to the challenging environmental conditions of the Central Plateau, where irregular rainfall, extreme temperature variations, and poor soil quality required specialized farming techniques. Archaeological investigations reveal extensive terracing systems that maximized cultivated area while preventing soil erosion, irrigation networks that captured and distributed scarce water resources, and storage facilities that preserved grain supplies through extended drought periods. The integration of livestock management with crop production created sustainable agricultural systems that could support substantial populations despite environmental constraints that limited agricultural productivity. The emergence of Numantia as the primary political and military centre of Celtiberian resistance demonstrated the organisational capabilities that allowed scattered tribal groups to coordinate effective opposition to Roman expansion. Located on a plateau overlooking the Duero River, Numantia combined natural defensive advantages with sophisticated fortification systems that created one of the most formidable strongholds in ancient Iberia. The site's strategic position controlled important transportation routes through the central Meseta, while providing access to agricultural areas and mineral resources that supported the substantial population required for sustained military resistance. The fortification systems at Numantia incorporated advanced engineering techniques that reflected centuries of military experience adapted to local topographic conditions and strategic requirements. The defensive walls employed the distinctive Celtiberian construction method that combined massive stone blocks with timber reinforcement systems, creating structures that could withstand both siege engines and the seismic activity common in the region. The integration of multiple defensive lines with natural obstacles created layered defensive systems that forced attacking armies to overcome successive barriers while exposing them to coordinated defensive fire from elevated positions. The urban organisation within Numantia revealed the social complexity and administrative sophistication that characterized mature Celtiberian society, with distinct functional areas that reflected specialized activities while maintaining overall defensive coordination. Residential quarters featured standardized housing units that suggested systematic urban planning, while craft workshops concentrated near defensive walls provided easy access to military equipment maintenance and production facilities. The presence of substantial storage areas and water management systems indicated preparation for extended siege warfare, with provisions that could sustain the population through prolonged isolation from external supply sources. The Lusitanian territories of Western Iberia developed distinctive cultural traditions that reflected their position at the intersection of Atlantic, Mediterranean, and continental European cultural influences, creating societies that combined indigenous Iberian foundations with selective adoption of external innovations. The mountainous terrain of modern Portugal and western Spain provided natural defensive advantages that Lusitanian communities enhanced through sophisticated fortification techniques, while the region's position along Atlantic trade routes facilitated cultural and economic exchanges that influenced local development. The archaeological record reveals material culture traditions that maintained distinctive Lusitanian characteristics while incorporating elements derived from contact with Celtic, Phoenician, and later Roman influences. The Castra culture that dominated Lusitanian settlement patterns represented sophisticated adaptations to the region's mountainous topography and Atlantic climate, creating defensive communities that could exploit natural resources while maintaining security against external threats. These settlements typically occupied elevated positions that provided commanding views over surrounding valleys while offering multiple escape routes through mountain passes that could be defended by small forces against larger armies. The construction techniques employed in Lusitanian castros demonstrated advanced understanding of local geological conditions, with defensive walls that incorporated natural rock outcrops while using sophisticated masonry techniques adapted to available materials. Citania de Breteiros, located in northern Portugal, exemplified the architectural sophistication that characterized mature Lusitanian settlements and revealed the complex social organization that supported these communities. The site featured elaborate residential structures constructed using carefully fitted granite blocks, with architectural elements that combined functional efficiency with aesthetic considerations. The integration of water management systems, defensive features, and residential areas demonstrated sophisticated urban planning that maximized the use of limited hilltop space while maintaining defensive capabilities and supporting craft production activities. The distinctive circular houses that characterize Lusitanian architecture reflected both cultural preferences and practical adaptations to local environmental conditions, with construction techniques that provided effective protection against the region's wet Atlantic climate while maintaining structural integrity on steep hillside locations. These structures featured sophisticated roofing systems that shed water effectively while providing adequate insulation, stone foundations that prevented moisture damage, and interior arrangements that maximized usable space while accommodating extended family groups. The standardization of construction techniques across wide geographic areas suggested systematic knowledge transfer and possibly coordinated planning among Lusitanian communities. The emergence of Viriathus as the leader of Lusitanian resistance during the mid-2nd century BC marked the beginning of systematic opposition to Roman expansion that would challenge Roman military capabilities for over a decade. Viriathus combined traditional Lusitanian military techniques with innovative tactical approaches that exploited Roman weaknesses while maximizing indigenous advantages in mobility, local knowledge, and guerrilla warfare capabilities. His background as a shepherd provided intimate knowledge of the mountainous terrain that became crucial in developing tactical strategies that neutralized Roman advantages in heavy infantry combat and siege warfare. The military innovations introduced by Viriathus transformed traditional Lusitanian warfare from localized tribal conflicts into coordinated campaigns that threatened Roman control throughout western Iberia. His tactical system emphasized mobility, surprise attacks, and rapid withdrawal to prepare defensive positions that exploited natural topographic advantages while avoiding direct confrontation with Roman tactical superiority. The coordination of multiple tribal groups under unified command required sophisticated organizational capabilities and diplomatic skills that transcended traditional tribal boundaries and rivalries. The guerrilla warfare techniques employed by Viriathus during the Lusitanian Wars represented sophisticated adaptations of traditional tribal military practices to the specific challenges posed by Roman military systems. His forces employed hit-and-run tactics that targeted Roman supply lines, isolated garrisons, and vulnerable columns while avoiding direct confrontation with main Roman armies. The systematic destruction of Roman infrastructure and the targeting of Roman allies created strategic effects that extended far beyond immediate tactical victories, forcing Roman commanders to divert substantial resources to defensive operations while limiting their ability to conduct offensive campaigns. The Battle of Tribala, in 147 BC, demonstrated the effectiveness of Viriathus's tactical innovations and revealed the vulnerabilities in Roman military systems when confronted with opponents who refused to fight according to conventional patterns. Viriathus employed a feigned retreat that drew Roman forces into a carefully prepared ambush, where Lusitanian warriors hidden in rocky terrain could exploit their advantages in individual combat skills while negating Roman formation fighting capabilities. The devastating defeat suffered by Roman forces under Gaius Vitellius encouraged additional Lusitanian tribes to join the resistance, while demonstrating the potential effectiveness of coordinated tribal military action. The siege warfare techniques developed during the Lusitanian Wars revealed the sophisticated defensive capabilities that Lusitanian communities had developed through centuries of intertribal conflict and external pressure. Lusitanian fortifications incorporated natural topographic advantages with artificial defensive systems that created nearly impregnable strongholds when properly garrisoned and supplied. The integration of multiple defensive lines, concealed positions, and coordinated fields of fire created killing zones where defending forces could concentrate missile fire against attacking armies while remaining protected behind massive stone walls. The diplomatic initiatives pursued by Viriathus demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Roman imperial politics and the strategic value of coordinated resistance among Rome's enemies throughout the western Mediterranean. Lusitanian diplomatic missions reached Carthaginian territories in North Africa, Celtic tribes in Gaul, and other indigenous Iberian communities, creating the potential for coordinated military actions that could force Rome to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. The archaeological evidence for increased trade and cultural exchange during this period suggests that these diplomatic efforts achieved substantial success in creating anti-Roman alliances. The eventual assassination of Viriathus in 139 BC through Roman bribery of his associates marked the end of organised Lusitanian resistance, while demonstrating the sophisticated intelligence operations and political manipulation that characterised Roman imperial expansion. The systematic elimination of Lusitanian leadership through assassination, bribery, and political manipulation revealed Roman understanding that military force alone could not achieve lasting conquest without addressing the political and social structures that supported indigenous resistance. The subsequent integration of Lusitanian territories into Roman provincial administration required complex negotiations and accommodations that preserved certain local traditions while establishing Roman political control. The Mediterranean coastlands of Iberia experienced fundamentally different patterns of cultural development due to their intensive contact with Phoenician and Greek colonial settlements that established permanent trading posts and cultural centres from the 8th century BC onward. These coastal regions became zones of intensive cultural interaction, where indigenous Iberian societies encountered and selectively adopted Mediterranean technologies, artistic traditions, and political innovations while maintaining their distinctive cultural identities. The archaeological record reveals complex patterns of cultural exchange that created hybrid societies combining indigenous foundations with Mediterranean influences. The Phoenician colony at Gadire, established around 800 BC, became the primary centre of Phoenician influence in western Iberia and created lasting impacts on indigenous cultural development throughout the region. The strategic position of Gadire at the entrance to the Atlantic provided Phoenician merchants with control over crucial trade routes while offering access to Iberian mineral resources, particularly silver from the Rio Tinto mining district. The wealth generated through this trade supported the development of sophisticated urban centres and craft production facilities that served both local needs and long-distance commercial networks. The technological innovations introduced through Phoenician contact transformed indigenous Iberian societies in fundamental ways, particularly in metallurgy, pottery production, and agricultural techniques that increased productivity while supporting larger populations. Phoenician metalworking techniques included advanced silver refining methods that allowed more efficient exploitation of Iberian ore deposits, while new pottery production methods created standardized vessels suitable for long-distance trade. The introduction of new agricultural crops and farming techniques increased agricultural productivity while supporting the population growth necessary for urban development and craft specialization. The artistic influences transmitted through Phoenician contact created distinctive hybrid traditions that combined Mediterranean decorative motifs with indigenous Iberian artistic preferences, producing material culture that reflected the complex cultural interactions that characterized coastal regions. Iberian pottery from areas of intensive Phoenician contact features decorative programs that incorporate Phoenician geometric patterns, figural representations, and technical innovations, while maintaining distinctively Iberian vessel forms and functional characteristics. The development of Iberian sculpture traditions revealed similar patterns of selective cultural adoption, with indigenous artists incorporating Mediterranean techniques and motifs while expressing distinctively Iberian cultural values and aesthetic preferences. The Greek colonial settlements established along the eastern Iberian coast from the 6th century BC created additional centres of Mediterranean influence that complemented and sometimes competed with Phoenician cultural impacts. The Greek colony at Emporion became a major centre of Greek influence in northeastern Iberia, facilitating the introduction of Greek artistic traditions, religious practices, and political innovations that influenced indigenous development throughout the region. The archaeological evidence reveals extensive trade relationships that connected Greek colonial settlements with indigenous Iberian communities throughout the interior, creating networks of cultural exchange that transmitted Greek innovations across wide geographic areas. The urban planning innovations introduced through Greek contact demonstrated sophisticated approaches to city organisation that influenced indigenous Iberian settlement patterns, while reflecting Greek adaptation to local environmental conditions and cultural preferences. Greek colonial settlements featured regular street grids, planned residential quarters, and integrated public spaces that provided models for indigenous communities, while accommodating Greek cultural requirements for civic organisation and religious observance. The adaptation of Greek architectural techniques to local materials and climatic conditions created distinctive colonial architectural traditions that influenced broader regional development patterns. The religious innovations transmitted through Greek contact created syncretic traditions that combined Greek mythological elements with indigenous Iberian religious practices, producing complex belief systems that reflected the cultural synthesis that characterized coastal regions. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the material signature of these hybrid traditions, including Greek-style temples that incorporated indigenous architectural elements, votive deposits that combined Greek and Iberian ritual objects, and burial practices that reflected both cultural traditions. The development of indigenous Iberian coinage systems during this period revealed Greek influence in both technical methods and iconographic programs, while expressing distinctively Iberian political and cultural values. The Iberian script that emerged during the 5th century BC represented one of the most significant cultural innovations of the Iron Age period and demonstrated the sophisticated intellectual development that characterized mature Iberian societies. This writing system combined elements derived from Phoenician and Greek alphabetic traditions with indigenous innovations that adapted Mediterranean writing techniques to the specific requirements of Iberian languages. The archaeological evidence reveals extensive use of this script for both commercial and administrative purposes, suggesting widespread literacy among Iberian elites and the development of complex record-keeping systems that supported political and economic administration. The sophisticated writing systems and urban planning innovations that characterized Mediterranean-influenced Iberian societies found their counterparts across the waters of the Atlantic, where the British Isles had developed their own distinctive Iron Age cultures, largely independent of direct Mediterranean contact until the Roman invasions of the 1st century AD. The geographic isolation provided by the English Channel and Irish Sea created conditions that allowed indigenous British and Irish societies to evolve unique cultural traditions, while selectively adopting technological innovations that arrived through trade networks and population movements from continental Europe. Archaeological evidence reveals that these island societies achieved remarkable levels of political sophistication, artistic achievement, and technological capability that rivaled their continental contemporaries while maintaining distinctively insular characteristics. The Brigantes Confederation dominated much of northern England during the later Iron Age, controlling territories that extended from the Pennine Highlands to the eastern coast and encompassing some of the most strategically important regions of pre-Roman Britain. Their name, derived from a Celtic root meaning high ones or elevated people, reflected both their geographic position in the upland regions and their political status as one of the most powerful tribal confederations in Iron Age Britain. Archaeological investigations throughout Brigantian territory reveal sophisticated settlement hierarchies that included major hill forts, smaller defended enclosures, and extensive networks of undefended farmsteads that suggest complex political organisation capable of coordinating activities across vast geographic areas. The hill fort at Stanwick in North Yorkshire represents the most impressive surviving example of Brigantian military architecture and demonstrates the sophisticated defensive capabilities that these communities developed during the 1st century AD. The earthwork defences enclosed an area of approximately 300 hectares, making it one of the largest fortified sites in Iron Age Europe, and suggesting a defensive system designed to protect substantial populations during extended siege warfare. The construction techniques employed multiple lines of massive earthen ramparts, reinforced with timber palisades and stone revetments, creating defensive barriers that could absorb the impact of siege engines, while providing elevated positions for coordinated missile defence. The archaeological evidence reveals that construction occurred in several phases, with the defensive perimeter expanding over time to encompass additional areas, as political circumstances required enhanced protection for larger populations. The internal organisation of Stanwick revealed the administrative complexity that characterised mature Brigantian society, with distinct functional areas that reflected specialised activities while maintaining overall defensive coordination. Excavations have uncovered evidence for extensive metalworking activities, including iron smelting furnaces, bronze casting workshops, and specialised facilities for weapon production that could supply military equipment for substantial armed forces. The presence of imported goods from continental Europe, including Roman luxury items and Gallic pottery, demonstrated the trade networks that connected Brigantian communities with broader European commercial systems, while providing access to technological innovations and raw materials not available locally. The Brigantian political system incorporated multiple sub-tribal groups under confederate leadership that balanced central authority with local autonomy, creating governmental structures that could coordinate large-scale military actions while maintaining traditional tribal identities and customs. Archaeological evidence from across Brigantian territory reveals standardized pottery styles, metalworking techniques, and architectural traditions that suggest systematic cultural integration under unified leadership, while regional variations in material culture indicate the preservation of local traditions within the broader Confederate structure. The scale of construction projects like Stanwick required organisational capabilities that could mobilise labour forces numbering in the thousands while coordinating complex engineering projects over extended time periods. The Iceni Confederation controlled the fertile lowlands of East Anglia and developed distinctive cultural traditions that combined indigenous British foundations with selective adoption of continental European innovations transmitted through extensive trade networks. Their territory encompassed some of the most agriculturally productive regions of Iron Age Britain, supporting substantial populations that engaged in intensive farming, craft production, and long-distance trade activities. Archaeological investigations throughout Iceni territory reveal sophisticated agricultural systems that maximised productivity through careful land management, while extensive evidence for craft specialisation indicates the economic complexity that characterised mature Iron Age societies. The development of distinctive Iceni coinage systems during the 1st century BC demonstrated the political sophistication and economic integration that characterised this confederation, while revealing the artistic traditions that distinguished Iceni culture from neighbouring groups. These coins featured complex iconographic programs that combined traditional Celtic artistic motifs with innovations that reflected local cultural preferences and political messages. The technical quality of Iceni coinage rivaled contemporary Roman issues in terms of metallurgical sophistication and artistic achievement, while the standardization of weights and designs indicated systematic administrative control over monetary production and distribution. The famous Snettisham treasure deposits discovered in Norfolk provide extraordinary evidence for the wealth accumulation and artistic achievement that characterized Iceni elite culture during the late Iron Age. These deposits contained hundreds of gold and silver torques, bracelets, and other ornaments that demonstrated the sophisticated metalworking capabilities and aesthetic sensibilities that distinguished Iceni craftsmen. The great torque from Snettisham, weighing over 1 kilogram and featuring intricate twisted cable construction terminated by elaborately decorated terminals, represents one of the finest examples of Celtic metalworking from anywhere in Europe. The technical challenges involved in creating such massive gold ornaments required advanced knowledge of metal properties, specialized tools, and organizational systems that could coordinate complex production processes. The artistic traditions evidenced in the Snettisham treasures reveal the distinctive aesthetic preferences that characterized Iceni culture, while demonstrating connections to broader European artistic developments. The decorative programs incorporated flowing curvilinear designs that reflected Latene artistic influences transmitted through continental trade networks, while the execution techniques and stylistic details revealed distinctively British innovations that adapted continental motifs to local preferences. The use of complex geometric patterns, stylized animal forms, and abstract designs created compositions that achieved a remarkable visual impact through the interplay of positive and negative space, textural contrasts, and carefully controlled proportional relationships. The Catuvellauni Confederation emerged as the dominant political force in southeastern Britain during the 1st century BC, controlling territories that encompassed the Thames Valley and surrounding regions, while maintaining complex relationships with both neighbouring British tribes and Roman authorities across the Channel. Their strategic position controlling crucial river crossings and overland routes provided economic advantages that supported political centralisation and military expansion, while their proximity to continental Europe facilitated cultural exchanges that influenced local development. Archaeological evidence reveals that Catuvellauni territory contained some of the most sophisticated urban centres in pre-Roman Britain, including major oppida that rivaled continental European examples in scale and complexity. Verulamium, the primary Catuvellauni oppidum, located near modern St Albans, demonstrated the urban planning capabilities and architectural sophistication that characterised mature British Iron Age societies. The settlement covered approximately 100 hectares and featured defensive earthworks that enclosed residential areas, craft workshops, and administrative centres within a coordinated urban system. The construction techniques employed massive earthen ramparts reinforced with timber frameworks and stone revetments, creating defensive barriers that could withstand siege warfare while providing elevated positions for coordinated defence. The internal organisation revealed systematic planning that allocated specific areas for different activities while maintaining overall defensive integration and administrative coordination. The emergence of proto-urban centres like Verulamium reflected the political and economic developments that transformed British Iron Age society during the 1st century BC, as increased trade contact with continental Europe and internal political competition drove the development of more complex settlement hierarchies and administrative systems. These oppidae served multiple functions as defensive strongholds, commercial centres, and political capitals that coordinated activities across extensive territories while providing focal points for cultural and religious activities. The concentration of craft production, administrative activities, and elite residences within these centres created urban environments that supported specialised occupations and complex social interactions. The distinctive British coinage traditions that emerged during this period reveal the political sophistication and artistic achievement that characterised these island societies while demonstrating their integration into broader European cultural and economic networks. British coin designs incorporated iconographic elements derived from continental European sources, particularly Gallic prototypes, while developing distinctively insular characteristics that reflected local cultural preferences and political messages. The technical quality of British coinage production employed advanced metallurgical techniques, including precise alloy control, sophisticated die cutting, and quality control measures that ensured consistent weight and purity standards. The hill forts that dominated Iron Age British settlement patterns represented sophisticated adaptations to the island's diverse topographic conditions, while reflecting the military requirements and defensive strategies that characterised inter-tribal competition and external threats. These fortified sites typically exploited natural defensive advantages provided by elevated positions, steep slopes, and natural obstacles, while incorporating artificial defences that enhanced protective capabilities and created coordinated defensive systems. The construction techniques employed varied according to local geological conditions and available materials, creating regional architectural traditions that reflected both practical constraints and cultural preferences. Maiden Castle in Dorset exemplified the architectural sophistication and defensive capabilities that characterised the most impressive British hill forts, while demonstrating the organisational capacity required for such massive construction projects. The site featured multiple concentric defensive lines, that created successive barriers around a central area of approximately 19 hectares, with earthwork defences that rose to heights of over 20 metres in some locations. The construction employed sophisticated engineering techniques that maximised defensive effectiveness while minimising construction requirements, including the use of natural topographic features, carefully designed entrance systems, and integrated obstacle networks that channeled attacking forces into predetermined killing zones. The entrance systems at Maiden Castle reveal the tactical sophistication that characterised British hill fort design and demonstrated the military experience that informed defensive planning. The complex gateway arrangements featured multiple turns, narrow passages and overlapping fields of fire that forced attacking armies to advance through carefully controlled approaches while exposing them to concentrated missile fire from elevated defensive positions. The archaeological evidence reveals multiple construction phases that reflect evolving defensive requirements and tactical innovations, with later modifications that incorporated lessons learned from military experience and changing threat environments. The Roman invasion of Britain, initiated by Emperor Claudius in 43 AD, represented the culmination of decades of intelligence gathering, diplomatic preparation, and strategic planning that had gradually prepared the ground for systematic conquest. The decision to invade reflected both immediate political considerations within the Roman Empire and long-term strategic objectives that encompassed the complete integration of Britain into the Roman provincial system. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive Roman knowledge of British geography, political organisation, and military capabilities that could only have been acquired through systematic intelligence operations conducted over extended periods prior to the invasion. The initial landing at Richborough in Kent demonstrated Roman amphibious assault capabilities that had been refined through previous campaigns in Gaul and Germany, while the rapid establishment of secure beachheads revealed the logistical planning and organisational efficiency that characterised Roman military operations. The invasion force, consisting of 4 legions supported by auxiliary units and naval elements, represented one of the largest military expeditions undertaken by Rome during the 1st century AD, and demonstrated imperial commitment to achieving decisive results rather than limited tactical objectives. The coordination required to transport, supply and deploy such substantial forces across the English Channel showcased Roman military engineering and administrative capabilities that far exceeded anything available to British defenders. The Battle of the Medway in 43 AD provided the first major test of Roman tactical capabilities against British military systems and revealed both the effectiveness of Roman military organisation and the continuing combat effectiveness of British warriors when properly coordinated and motivated. British forces employed traditional Celtic tactics that emphasised individual combat skills, mobility, and the psychological impact of mass chariot charges, while Roman commanders adapted their standard tactical procedures to address the specific challenges posed by British fighting methods and terrain conditions. The 2-day battle demonstrated the tactical flexibility that characterised Roman military leadership while revealing the determination and skill of British resistance. The systematic advance through southeastern Britain following the Medway victory showcased Roman operational planning that balanced military objectives with political considerations, designed to minimise resistance while maximising the psychological impact of Roman success. The rapid capture of Camulodunum, the primary Catuvellauni stronghold, eliminated the most significant centre of organised resistance, while providing Roman forces with a secure base for further operations. The establishment of veteran colonies and administrative centres demonstrated Roman commitment to permanent occupation rather than temporary conquest, while the systematic integration of cooperative British elites into Roman administrative structures revealed the sophisticated imperial policies that characterised Roman provincial government. The conquest of Wales presented Roman forces with fundamentally different challenges than those encountered in the lowland regions of southeastern Britain. as the mountainous terrain, dispersed settlement patterns, and guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Welsh tribes required substantial modifications to standard Roman military procedures. The Silures and Ordovices, the primary tribal confederations controlling Welsh territories, had developed military traditions specifically adapted to mountain warfare that emphasised mobility, local knowledge, and the exploitation of natural defensive advantages that negated many traditional Roman tactical superiorities. The campaigns of Sextus Julius Frontinus during the 70s AD demonstrated the tactical innovations and strategic patience required for successful mountain warfare, as Roman forces adapted their operational methods to address the specific challenges posed by Welsh terrain and defensive strategies. The systematic construction of road networks, fortified supply bases, and coordinated advance posts created the infrastructure necessary for sustained military operations in hostile terrain, while providing secure communications and supply lines that could support extended campaigns. The integration of auxiliary units drawn from Germanic and Gallic tribes provided Roman commanders with specialized capabilities adapted to irregular warfare and mountain combat conditions. The Siege of Monir in 78 AD represented the culmination of Roman efforts to eliminate organized Welsh resistance, while demonstrating the sophisticated amphibious assault capabilities that Roman engineers had developed for operations in challenging coastal environments. The island's significance as a centre of Druidic religious authority made its capture essential for eliminating the ideological foundation of British resistance, while its strategic position controlling access to Irish sea trade routes provided economic motivations for Roman occupation. The complex logistical arrangements required to transport siege equipment and assault forces across the Menai Strait showcased Roman engineering capabilities, while the systematic destruction of Druidic religious centres demonstrated Roman understanding of the relationship between religious authority and political resistance. The failed attempts to conquer Scotland reveal the geographic and logistical constraints that ultimately limited Roman expansion, while demonstrating the continuing effectiveness of tribal military organisation when properly adapted to local conditions and strategic requirements. The Caledonian confederations that controlled the Scottish Highlands had developed military traditions that exploited the region's challenging terrain while maintaining political organisations capable of coordinating resistance across extensive geographic areas. The archaeological evidence from Scottish Iron Age sites reveals sophisticated defensive systems, advanced metalworking capabilities, and evidence for coordinated political activity that suggest organisational complexity comparable to the most advanced continental European tribal confederations. The campaigns of Gnaeus Julius Agricola during the 80s AD represented the most systematic Roman attempt to achieve complete conquest of Britain, and demonstrated both the tactical capabilities and strategic limitations that characterized Roman military operations in challenging geographic environments. Agricola's advance through the Scottish lowlands employed coordinated land and naval operations that maximised Roman advantages in logistics and engineering, while attempting to prevent Caledonian forces from exploiting their traditional advantages in mobility and local knowledge. The construction of a network of fortified positions and supply bases created the infrastructure necessary for sustained operations in hostile territory, while providing secure communications with Roman bases in northern England. The Battle of Mons Graupius in 84 AD provided the decisive confrontation between Roman tactical systems and Caledonian military capabilities, revealing both the effectiveness of Roman military organisation and the limitations imposed by geographic and logistical constraints on sustained imperial expansion. The Caledonian forces, estimated by Tacitus at over 30,000 warriors, employed traditional Celtic tactics adapted to local terrain conditions, while attempting to exploit Roman vulnerabilities in extended supply lines and unfamiliar operating environments. The Roman victory demonstrated tactical superiority in direct confrontation while failing to achieve the strategic objectives necessary for permanent conquest and political integration. The subsequent Roman withdrawal from Scotland and the establishment of Hadrian's Wall as the permanent northern frontier reflected strategic reassessment that balanced imperial ambitions against practical limitations imposed by geography, logistics, and the continuing effectiveness of tribal resistance. The decision to construct a permanent barrier across northern England represented a fundamental shift in Roman strategic thinking from unlimited expansion toward defensive consolidation that acknowledged the practical limits of imperial control. Archaeological investigations along Hadrian's Wall reveal the sophisticated engineering capabilities and massive resource commitments that characterize this defensive system, while demonstrating Roman adaptation to the specific requirements of frontier defense in challenging geographic environments. Hadrian's Wall, constructed between 122 and 128 AD, represented one of the most impressive engineering achievements of the Roman Empire and demonstrated the organizational capabilities required for massive construction projects in hostile frontier environments. The wall extended for 84 Roman miles across northern England, from Wallsend on the River Tyne to Bowness on Solway, creating a continuous barrier that controlled movement between Roman Britain and the unconquered territories to the north. The construction employed sophisticated engineering techniques that adapted Roman architectural traditions to local geological conditions, while creating defensive systems that could be maintained and operated by relatively small garrison forces. The defensive systems incorporated into Hadrian's Wall revealed the military experience and tactical understanding that informed Roman frontier policy, while demonstrating adaptation to the specific threats posed by Caledonian military capabilities. The wall itself stood approximately 6 meters high and featured a parapet that provided protected positions for defenders, while creating clear fields of fire across the approaches from the north. The integration of mile castles, turrets, and major forts created a coordinated defensive network that could provide early warning of approaching threats while concentrating defensive forces at strategic points that controlled major transportation routes and river crossings. The Antonine Wall, constructed during the 140 SAD as part of a renewed attempt to advance the Roman frontier northward, demonstrated both the continuing imperial ambitions and the practical difficulties that ultimately forced Roman withdrawal to the Hadrian's Wall line. Located approximately 100 miles north of Hadrian's Wall, the Antonine Wall extended for 37 miles between the Forth and Clyde estuaries and employed different construction techniques that reflected both local materials and lessons learned from the earlier frontier system. The turf and timber construction created defensive barriers that could be erected more rapidly than stone walls, while providing adequate protection against the military capabilities available to Caledonian forces. The eventual abandonment of the Antonine Wall, around 164 AD, and the permanent re-establishment of Hadrian's Wall as the northern frontier reflected strategic reassessment that acknowledged the limitations of Roman military capabilities in the challenging geographic and political environment of northern Britain. The archaeological evidence reveals a systematic dismantling of Antonine Wall installations and the transfer of military equipment and personnel back to the Hadrian's Wall line, suggesting coordinated withdrawal rather than precipitous retreat under military pressure. The decision to maintain the more southern frontier represented pragmatic acceptance of geographic and logistical constraints, while preserving Roman control over the economically and strategically valuable territories of northern England. Ireland's development during the Iron Age proceeded largely independent of direct Roman influence, creating distinctive cultural traditions that combined indigenous foundations with selective adoption of innovations transmitted through trade networks and cultural exchanges with Britain and continental Europe. The absence of Roman conquest allowed Irish societies to evolve unique political systems, artistic traditions, and technological capabilities that reflected both insular conditions and connections to broader European cultural developments. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated settlement hierarchies, advanced metalworking traditions, and complex religious practices that demonstrate the cultural achievement of Iron Age Irish societies, while revealing their participation in wider Atlantic cultural networks. The Tuatha system that dominated Irish political organisation represented sophisticated adaptations of Celtic tribal structures to the specific geographic and demographic conditions of Ireland, while maintaining connections to broader European political traditions. These territorial kingdoms typically controlled areas corresponding to modern baronies or small counties, with boundaries that reflected both geographic features and traditional territorial claims maintained through oral historical traditions. Archaeological investigations reveal that Tuatha territories contained hierarchical settlement systems that included royal centres, subsidiary strongholds, and networks of farmsteads that suggest sophisticated administrative organisation and resource management capabilities. The royal centres that served as political and ceremonial focal points for Tuatha kingdoms demonstrated the architectural sophistication and symbolic complexity that characterised Irish Iron Age elite culture, while revealing the religious and administrative functions that legitimised political authority. Sites like the Hill of Tara in County Meath contained multiple ceremonial monuments spanning several millennia, with Iron Age additions that incorporated earlier sacred sites into contemporary political and religious systems. The archaeological evidence reveals complex sequences of construction that reflected evolving political requirements while maintaining continuity with ancestral traditions that provided legitimacy for contemporary rulers. The distinctive Irish artistic traditions that emerged during the Iron Age created some of the most sophisticated and influential decorative arts in prehistoric Europe, while demonstrating the cultural synthesis that characterised Irish society during this period. The Turo stone in County Galway exemplified the adaptation of Latin artistic traditions to Irish cultural preferences and available materials, featuring flowing curvilinear designs carved in granite that demonstrated both technical mastery and aesthetic sophistication. The execution required advanced stone carving techniques and sophisticated understanding of compositional principles that created visual effects comparable to the finest metalwork while adapting continental artistic traditions to distinctively Irish cultural contexts. The metalworking traditions that flourished across Iron Age Ireland produced artefacts of exceptional quality that rivaled the finest continental European examples, while developing distinctively Irish characteristics that reflected local cultural preferences and technical innovations. Irish smiths mastered advanced techniques including pattern welding, complex bronze casting, and sophisticated gold working that created weapons, ornaments, and ceremonial objects of remarkable artistic and technical achievement. The Broiter hoard discovered in County Londonderry contained gold ornaments including a magnificent boat model complete with oars, mast and rigging that demonstrated both the technical mastery of Irish goldsmiths and the symbolic importance of maritime activities in Irish culture. The technological innovations that characterised Iron Age metalworking across Europe reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge and systematic experimentation that pushed the boundaries of what could be achieved with available materials and techniques. Blacksmithing evolved from simple hammer and anvil work to sophisticated processes that incorporated precise temperature control, specialised alloy compositions, and complex multi-stage production sequences that created tools and weapons of unprecedented quality and durability. The development of water-powered machinery during the later Iron Age represented a crucial technological breakthrough that mechanised previously labour-intensive processes while increasing production capacity and improving product consistency. The bloomery furnaces that formed the foundation of Iron Age iron production underwent continuous refinement throughout this period, with engineers developing increasingly efficient designs that maximised fuel economy while achieving higher temperatures and more complete ore reduction. Archaeological investigations at iron production sites reveal furnace designs that incorporated sophisticated air circulation systems, specialised refractory materials, and carefully engineered charging systems that optimised the smelting process. The Populonia furnaces on the Italian coast employed innovative designs that used natural wind patterns to provide forced draft, while sites in the Noricum region developed water-powered bellows systems that achieved unprecedented temperature control and fuel efficiency. The development of specialised steelmaking techniques during the later Iron Age created materials with properties that would not be exceeded until the Industrial Revolution, demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of metallurgy that characterised mature Iron Age societies. Smiths learned to control carbon content through careful management of fuel composition and atmospheric conditions, creating steels with specific properties optimised for different applications. The pattern welding techniques employed in high-status weapons combined different steel types and complex laminated structures that provided optimal combinations of hardness, flexibility and visual appeal through the distinctive serpentine patterns created by differential etching of the composite materials. The quenching and tempering processes that completed weapon production required precise understanding of thermal properties and timing that could only be acquired through extensive practical experience and systematic knowledge transfer between master craftsmen and apprentices. Different quenching media produced different cooling rates and final properties, with smiths developing specialised techniques that used water, oil or even urine to achieve specific results. The tempering process that followed initial quenching required careful heating to precise temperatures that balanced hardness with toughness, preventing brittleness while maintaining cutting performance. Rotary querns represented one of the most significant technological innovations in food processing during the Iron Age, replacing the labour-intensive saddle querns that had dominated grain processing since the Neolithic period. These circular grinding stones consisted of two carefully shaped discs with precisely engineered grinding surfaces that created efficient flour production while reducing the physical effort required for daily food preparation. The upper stone featured a central hole for grain input and a wooden handle that allowed continuous rotation, while the lower stone incorporated carefully carved furrows that channeled ground flour outward for collection. The production of rotary querns required sophisticated stoneworking techniques and geological knowledge that identified suitable raw materials while ensuring proper surface preparation and dimensional accuracy. Quarries in the Rhineland, particularly around Mayenne, became major production centres that supplied rotary querns throughout northern Europe, developing standardised production techniques that created consistent quality while reducing manufacturing costs. The transportation networks required to distribute these heavy stone implements demonstrated the commercial sophistication and logistical capabilities that characterised mature Iron Age economies. Agricultural implements underwent systematic improvement throughout the Iron Age, as iron technology enabled the production of more effective and durable tools that increased farming productivity while reducing labour requirements. Iron ploughshares could penetrate heavier soils and maintain sharp cutting edges longer than bronze equivalents, allowing cultivation of previously marginal lands while improving tillage quality on existing farmland. The development of asymmetrical ploughshares that turned soil to one side created more efficient furrow formation while reducing draft requirements for the animals pulling the plough. Scythes and sickles manufactured from iron provided substantial improvements in harvesting efficiency, while demonstrating the sophisticated metallurgical techniques required to create tools that combined sharp cutting edges with flexible, durable construction. The production of these implements required careful attention to steel composition and heat treatment, as the cutting edge needed hardness for sharpness retention, while the body required flexibility to prevent breakage during use. Archaeological examples reveal sophisticated welding techniques that attached high-carbon steel edges to wrought iron bodies, creating composite tools that optimize performance while minimizing material costs. The artistic achievements of Iron Age metalworkers reached their pinnacle in the production of torques, the distinctive neck ornaments that became synonymous with Celtic elite culture throughout Europe. These massive gold or bronze collars required advanced metallurgical knowledge and sophisticated craftsmanship that pushed the boundaries of what could be achieved with available technology. The great torque from Snettisham weighed over 1 kilogram and featured twisted cable construction that required precise control of gold working temperatures while maintaining structural integrity throughout the complex fabrication process. The construction techniques employed in torque production involved multiple specialized processes that demonstrated the organizational sophistication of Iron Age craft workshops. The initial preparation required careful alloy composition to achieve proper working properties, followed by wire drawing or forging to create the individual elements that would be twisted together to form the main body. The twisting process itself demanded precise coordination and timing to achieve uniform cable formation, while preventing work hardening that could cause breakage. The elaborate terminals that completed high-status examples incorporated complex decorative programs executed through repousse, chasing and engraving techniques that required years of training to master. Fibulae, the safety pin brooches used to fasten clothing, evolved into sophisticated artistic expressions that combined functional requirements with decorative elaboration, while serving as markers of cultural identity and social status. The development of spring mechanisms required precise understanding of metal properties and careful heat treatment to create springs that maintain tension without breaking under repeated use. Archaeological typologies based on fibular evolution provide some of the most sensitive chronological indicators available for Iron Age dating, as stylistic changes occurred rapidly and spread quickly through cultural networks. The decorative techniques applied to high-status fibulae incorporated the full range of metalworking skills available to Iron Age craftsmen, including complex casting, sophisticated surface treatments, and the integration of contrasting materials that created striking visual effects. Coral inlay became particularly characteristic of early Laterna fibulae, requiring careful cutting and fitting of Mediterranean coral into precisely machined bronze recesses. The technical challenges involved in this work demanded specialized tools and techniques that represented substantial investments in workshop equipment and craftsman training. Ceremonial weapons produced during the Iron Age combined functional military requirements with artistic elaboration that transformed utilitarian objects into symbols of power and status that reinforced social hierarchies while demonstrating craft sophistication. The Battersea shield, recovered from the Thames, featured repousse bronze decoration that created three-dimensional relief work of exceptional quality, with flowing curves and spirals that demonstrated complete mastery of the Latene artistic vocabulary. The technical execution required extensive planning and specialized forming techniques that shaped thin bronze sheets into complex three-dimensional compositions while maintaining structural integrity. Sword decoration reached extraordinary levels of sophistication in high-status examples that incorporated pattern welding, precious metal inlay, and elaborate hilt construction that transformed functional weapons into artistic masterpieces. The Kirkburn sword from Yorkshire featured an iron blade with pattern-welded construction that created distinctive serpentine patterns along the fuller, while the bronze hilt incorporated complex decorative elements that required advanced casting and finishing techniques. The scabbard decoration employed repousse and chasing techniques that created narrative scenes depicting warriors, animals, and mythological subjects that reflected the cultural values and artistic preferences of Iron Age elite society. Settlement patterns across Iron Age Europe revealed sophisticated understanding of landscape management and defensive requirements that balanced agricultural productivity with security considerations while creating sustainable communities that could support specialized craft production and long-distance trade activities. The nucleated villages that characterized many regions concentrated population in defensible locations while maintaining access to agricultural resources and transportation networks that facilitated economic exchange and cultural interaction. Roundhouses dominated residential architecture throughout much of Iron Age Europe, representing efficient adaptations to local climate conditions while providing flexible living spaces that could accommodate extended family groups and their economic activities. The construction techniques employed sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles, with timber frameworks that distributed loads effectively while providing adequate insulation and weather protection. The central hearths that characterized these structures created efficient heating systems while providing focal points for domestic activities and social interaction. The architectural evolution from simple round houses to more complex rectangular structures reflected both technological advancement and changing social requirements as Iron Age societies developed more sophisticated craft specialization and social stratification. The rectangular buildings that appeared during the later Iron Age often incorporated specialized areas for different activities, including craft workshops, storage facilities, and residential quarters that reflected the functional differentiation that characterized mature Iron Age communities. Hill forts represented the most impressive architectural achievements of Iron Age Europe, combining sophisticated defensive engineering with urban planning principles that created fortified centers capable of supporting substantial populations while maintaining military effectiveness. The defensive systems employed multiple techniques, including massive earthwork ramparts, timber palisades, stone walls, and integrated obstacle networks that created layered defensive barriers optimized for different types of military threats. The Murus Gallicus construction technique described by Caesar represented one of the most sophisticated fortification methods developed during the Iron Age, combining stone facing with internal timber frameworks and rubble fill that created walls capable of absorbing siege engine impacts while maintaining structural integrity. Archaeological investigations at sites like Bibracte reveal the engineering sophistication required for this construction, including precise timber joinery, coordinated stone placement, and integrated drainage systems that prevented water damage to the internal framework. Roman-influenced villa complexes that appeared in areas of intensive Roman contact demonstrated the rapid adoption of Mediterranean architectural traditions by Iron Age elites, while revealing the cultural synthesis that characterized frontier regions. These structures combined Roman planning principles with local building traditions and materials, creating hybrid architectural forms that reflected both imperial influence and indigenous preferences. The hypocaust heating systems that characterized many of these buildings required sophisticated understanding of thermal engineering principles, while demonstrating the technological transfer that occurred through cultural contact. Urban planning innovations that emerged during the later Iron Age reflected increasing population density and administrative complexity, while demonstrating sophisticated understanding of infrastructure requirements for sustainable urban development. The Oppida that developed across Celtic Europe employed systematic planning principles that allocated specific areas for different activities, while maintaining overall defensive coordination and providing adequate infrastructure for water supply, waste management, and transportation. Economic systems throughout Iron Age Europe evolved from simple barter arrangements to sophisticated commercial networks that employed standardized weights, measures, and eventually coinage systems that facilitated long-distance trade while supporting local craft specialization and agricultural intensification. The development of market centers provided focal points for economic exchange, while creating opportunities for cultural interaction and technological transfer that influenced local development patterns. Coinage development during the later Iron Age represented one of the most significant economic innovations of the period, providing standardized media of exchange that facilitated commercial transactions while serving political functions as symbols of authority and cultural identity. The earliest Celtic coinages drew inspiration from Greek and Roman prototypes, while developing distinctive iconographic programs that reflected local cultural values and political messages. The technical quality of Celtic coin production employed sophisticated metallurgical techniques, including precise alloy control, advanced die cutting, and quality assurance measures that ensured consistent weight and purity standards. The monetary systems that emerged during this period incorporated multiple denominations that served different economic functions, from high-value gold coins used for major transactions and tribute payments to small bronze issues that facilitated daily market activities. Archaeological evidence reveals the widespread circulation of these coinages across extensive geographic areas, suggesting the development of commercial networks that transcended traditional tribal boundaries while maintaining local cultural characteristics. Long-distance trade networks connected Iron Age European communities with markets throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond, creating cultural corridors that facilitated the exchange of goods, technologies and ideas across vast geographic distances. The amber routes that connected Baltic sources with Mediterranean markets represented some of the most important commercial arteries of the ancient world, supporting specialized trading communities while generating the wealth necessary for political centralization and cultural development. Craft specialization reached unprecedented levels during the Iron Age, as communities developed the economic complexity necessary to support full-time artisans who could dedicate themselves entirely to perfecting specialized skills and techniques. Pottery production evolved from simple household activities to sophisticated workshop systems that employed standardized techniques, specialized equipment, and quality control measures that created consistent products suitable for both local consumption and long-distance trade. The potter's wheel, introduced during the later Iron Age, revolutionized ceramic production by enabling the creation of symmetrical vessels with consistent wall thickness, while reducing the time and skill required for basic vessel formation. This technological innovation allowed potters to concentrate on decorative elaboration and specialized vessel forms, while increasing production capacity and improving product consistency. Archaeological evidence reveals the rapid spread of wheel-thrown pottery across Europe, suggesting systematic technology transfer through trade networks and craftsman mobility. Textile production during the Iron Age employed sophisticated techniques that created fabrics of exceptional quality, while demonstrating the technological capabilities and artistic sensibilities that characterized mature Iron Age societies. The development of advanced loom designs enabled the production of complex weave structures while increasing efficiency and product quality. Archaeological preservation of textiles in waterlogged and frozen contexts reveals the sophisticated dyeing techniques, decorative weaving patterns, and finishing processes that created garments suitable for both daily use and ceremonial occasions. Jewelry production represented one of the most technically demanding and artistically sophisticated craft specializations of the Iron Age, requiring mastery of multiple metalworking techniques while demonstrating the aesthetic sensibilities and cultural values that characterized different regional traditions. The production of complex ornaments required specialized tools, controlled working environments, and extensive training periods that created distinct craft traditions maintained through master-apprentice relationships and workshop organization. The sophisticated jewelry production techniques and cultural achievements that had reached their zenith during the height of Iron Age European civilization faced unprecedented challenges as the 3rd century AD witnessed the beginning of massive population movements that would fundamentally reshape the continent's political, cultural, and demographic landscape. The migration period, traditionally dated from approximately 300 to 600 AD, represented not merely a series of barbarian invasions, but rather a complex transformation process that involved the systematic movement of entire peoples, the collapse of established political structures, and the emergence of new hybrid societies that combined Iron Age tribal traditions with Roman administrative practices and Christian religious influences. The Gothic confederations that had developed along the Black Sea coastlands during the 3rd century AD exemplified the sophisticated political organisations that emerged from the synthesis of indigenous Iron Age traditions with innovations adopted through contact with Roman frontier communities. Archaeological evidence from sites like Cherniakov reveals settlements that combined traditional Germanic building techniques with Roman-influenced urban planning principles, creating communities that supported specialised craft production while maintaining the military capabilities necessary for territorial expansion. The material culture from these sites demonstrates the selective adoption of Roman technologies and artistic traditions while preserving distinctively Gothic cultural characteristics that would influence European development for centuries. The Visigoths, who emerged as a distinct political entity during the 4th century, developed governmental structures that balanced traditional Germanic tribal leadership with administrative innovations derived from Roman provincial management. Their territorial expansion into the Balkans and subsequent movement into Western Europe created new political entities that incorporated diverse populations while maintaining Gothic cultural identity and military traditions. Archaeological investigations at Visigothic sites reveal the systematic adaptation of Roman architectural techniques to Gothic cultural requirements, including the construction of palatial complexes that combine Germanic hall traditions with Mediterranean construction methods. The sack of Rome by Alaric in 410 AD represented a watershed moment that demonstrated both the military capabilities of Gothic forces and the fundamental transformation of Roman imperial authority that had been developing throughout the 4th century. The systematic organisation required for this campaign revealed the sophisticated logistical capabilities that Gothic leaders had developed through decades of military experience within Romance service. While the subsequent establishment of Visigothic kingdoms in Gaul and Hispania demonstrated their ability to create stable governmental structures that could administer diverse populations and maintain territorial control. The Ostrogothic kingdom, established by Theodoric in Italy during the late 5th century, created one of the most successful examples of post-Roman political organisation, combining Gothic military traditions with Roman administrative expertise while preserving classical cultural achievements. Archaeological evidence from Ravenna and other Ostrogothic centres reveals the sophisticated architectural programmes that characterised Theodoric's reign, including palatial complexes and religious buildings that incorporated both Germanic and Mediterranean design elements. The mosaics at Santa Pollinare Nuovo demonstrate the artistic synthesis that characterised Ostrogothic culture, featuring iconographic programmes that combine Christian religious themes with traditional Germanic symbolic elements. The Vandal migrations that carried these Germanic peoples across Gaul, through Hispania, and ultimately into North Africa, represented one of the most extensive population movements of the migration period, while demonstrating the organisational capabilities required for such massive undertakings. The Vandal kingdom, established in North Africa during the 5th century, created a maritime power that controlled crucial Mediterranean trade routes while maintaining Germanic cultural traditions adapted to African environmental conditions. Archaeological evidence from Vandal sites in Tunisia and Algeria reveals the continuation of traditional Germanic burial practices alongside the adoption of Roman urban planning principles and Mediterranean agricultural techniques. The Vandal naval capabilities that enabled their control of Mediterranean shipping routes demonstrated the rapid adoption of Roman maritime technologies by Germanic populations who had traditionally been land-based societies. The systematic construction of naval bases and the development of coordinated fleet operations required technical knowledge and organisational capabilities that reflected the sophisticated cultural synthesis that characterised post-Roman Germanic kingdoms. The famous sack of Rome by Genseric in 455 AD showcased these naval capabilities while demonstrating the strategic thinking that characterized mature Vandal political leadership. Frankish expansion throughout Gaul during the 5th and 6th centuries created the most enduring of the post-Roman Germanic kingdoms, while establishing political and cultural foundations that would influence European development throughout the medieval period. The Merovingian dynasty that emerged from this expansion combined traditional Frankish tribal leadership with Roman administrative practices, creating governmental structures capable of managing the diverse populations and complex territorial arrangements that characterized post-Roman Gaul. Archaeological evidence from Merovingian burial sites reveals the persistence of Germanic cultural traditions alongside the adoption of Christian religious practices and Mediterranean luxury goods. The Battle of Soissons in 486 AD, where Clovis defeated the last Roman forces in northern Gaul, marked the definitive end of Roman political authority in this region, while establishing Frankish control over territories that would become the foundation for medieval France. The systematic expansion that followed this victory demonstrated the military capabilities and political organisation that characterised mature Frankish society, while the conversion of Clovis to Christianity created new opportunities for cultural synthesis between Germanic traditions and Roman Christian culture. The Alemanni confederations that controlled territories along the Upper Rhine developed distinctive cultural traditions that reflected their position at the intersection of Germanic, Celtic, and Roman influences while maintaining military capabilities that challenged both Roman and Frankish expansion. Archaeological investigations at Alemannic sites reveal sophisticated metalworking traditions that combined Germanic techniques with innovations derived from contact with Roman craftsmen, creating distinctive artistic styles that influenced broader European cultural development. The elaborate grave goods from sites like Lauchheim demonstrate the wealth accumulation and craft specialization that characterized Alemannic elite culture. The Saxon migrations to Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries create new Germanic kingdoms that would fundamentally alter the cultural landscape of post-Roman Britain, while establishing political structures that combine traditional Germanic tribal organisation with innovations derived from contact with Romano-British populations. Archaeological evidence from early Anglo-Saxon sites reveals the systematic replacement of Romano-British material culture with Germanic traditions, while the gradual adoption of Christian religious practices created opportunities for cultural synthesis that would influence English development throughout the medieval period. The establishment of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria demonstrated the political capabilities of Germanic populations, while revealing the adaptation of traditional tribal structures to the requirements of territorial administration and diverse population management. The archaeological evidence from royal centres like Sutton Hoo reveals the sophisticated craft production and artistic achievement that characterised Anglo-Saxon elite culture, while the systematic construction of defensive earthworks like Offa's Dyke demonstrated the engineering capabilities and organisational capacity that characterised mature Anglo-Saxon society. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire represented not a single catastrophic event, but rather a gradual transformation process that extended over more than a century and involved the systematic replacement of Roman imperial administration with new political structures that combined Germanic tribal traditions with Roman bureaucratic practices. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD traditionally marks the end of the Western Empire, but archaeological evidence reveals that Roman cultural and administrative traditions continued in modified forms throughout the territories controlled by Germanic successor kingdoms. The Burgundian kingdom that emerged in the Rhone Valley during the 5th century exemplified the hybrid political structures that characterized post-Roman Europe, combining Germanic royal authority with Roman legal traditions and administrative practices. The Lex Burgundionum, promulgated during the reign of Gundobad, demonstrated the systematic adaptation of Roman legal principles to Germanic social structures while preserving traditional tribal customs and practices. Archaeological evidence from Burgundian sites reveals the continued production of Roman-style pottery and metalwork alongside distinctively Germanic artifacts, suggesting the persistence of Romano-Gallic craft traditions under Germanic political authority. The Lombard invasion of Italy during the 6th century created the last major Germanic kingdom on Roman soil, while demonstrating the continuing vitality of tribal military organizations centuries after the initial Germanic migrations. The Lombard political system that emerged in northern and central Italy combined traditional Germanic tribal leadership with Byzantine administrative practices, creating governmental structures that could manage the complex urban and rural populations that characterized post-Roman Italy. Archaeological investigations at Lombard sites reveal the sophisticated metalworking traditions and artistic achievements that characterized this culture, including the production of elaborate jewellery and weapons that combined Germanic techniques with Mediterranean artistic influences. The process of Christianization that accompanied and often facilitated Germanic political expansion represented one of the most significant cultural transformations of the migration period, as traditional Germanic religious practices gradually gave way to Christian beliefs while maintaining certain pagan elements that created distinctive hybrid religious traditions. The conversion of Germanic rulers like Clovis, Theodoric, and the Anglo-Saxon kings created new opportunities for cultural synthesis, while providing political advantages through alliance with Christian populations and ecclesiastical authorities. The systematic destruction of pagan religious sites and their replacement with Christian churches mark the physical transformation of the European religious landscape, while revealing the organized nature of Christianization efforts. Archaeological investigations at sites like Yavering in Northumbria reveal the direct replacement of traditional Germanic religious centres with Christian churches, while the incorporation of pagan symbolic elements into Christian architectural decoration demonstrates the gradual nature of religious transformation. The wooden stave churches of Scandinavia represent particularly striking examples of this synthesis, combining traditional Germanic building techniques with Christian architectural requirements. The persistence of pagan burial practices well into the Christian period reveals the complex nature of religious transformation, as populations gradually adopted Christian beliefs while maintaining traditional customs associated with death and the afterlife. Archaeological evidence from Merovingian cemeteries shows the gradual replacement of traditional grave goods with Christian symbols, while the orientation of burials shifted from traditional Germanic practices to Christian east-west alignment. The elaborate ship burials at sites like Sutton Hoo demonstrate the continuation of traditional Germanic royal funeral practices even after the official adoption of Christianity. The transformation of traditional sacred sites into Christian pilgrimage centres created continuity of religious function while fundamentally altering the spiritual landscape of post-Roman Europe. Many important medieval churches were constructed directly over earlier pagan temples or sacred groves, maintaining the religious significance of these locations while redirecting spiritual practices toward Christian observances. The archaeological evidence for this transformation reveals the systematic adaptation of pagan religious infrastructure to Christian requirements, including the reuse of carved stones and architectural elements in church construction. The development of Christian monasticism throughout former Roman territories created new centres of learning and cultural preservation that maintained classical traditions while adapting them to Christian theological requirements. The monasteries established throughout Ireland, Britain, and continental Europe became focal points for the preservation of classical texts, the development of Christian scholarship, and the creation of distinctive artistic traditions that combined Germanic decorative motifs with Christian iconographic programs. The illuminated manuscripts produced in these centres, such as the Book of Kells and the Lindisfarne Gospels, represent the highest achievements of early medieval art while demonstrating the sophisticated cultural synthesis that characterized post-Roman European civilization. The archaeological legacy of Iron Age Europe extends far beyond the material remains preserved in museums and archaeological sites, encompassing fundamental contributions to European cultural identity, linguistic development, and technological advancement that continue to influence modern European civilization. The Celtic languages that survived in Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and Brittany preserve linguistic traditions that originated during the Iron Age, while place names throughout Europe retain Celtic, Germanic, and other Iron Age linguistic elements that provide evidence for the cultural geography of prehistoric Europe. The technological innovations developed during the Iron Age provided foundations for medieval and early modern European industrial development, particularly in metallurgy, agriculture, and construction techniques that were refined and expanded, but not fundamentally replaced until the Industrial Revolution. The pattern welding techniques perfected by Iron Age smiths influenced medieval sword production, while the agricultural implements and techniques developed during this period remained standard throughout much of Europe until mechanization transformed farming practices during the 18th and 19th centuries. The artistic traditions established during the Iron Age continued to influence European decorative arts throughout the medieval period and beyond, with Celtic artistic motifs appearing in Romanesque and Gothic architectural decoration, manuscript illumination, and metalwork production. The interlace patterns, spiral designs, and stylized animal forms that characterized La Tène art provided inspiration for medieval artists, while maintaining connections to prehistoric European cultural traditions that transcended political and religious transformations. The settlement patterns and defensive strategies developed during the Iron Age influenced European urban development and military architecture throughout the medieval period, with many important medieval cities constructed on sites that had been continuously occupied since the Iron Age. The hill fort locations chosen by Iron Age populations often became the sites of medieval castles and fortified towns, while the defensive techniques developed during the Iron Age influenced medieval military engineering and fortification design. The political structures and legal traditions that emerged during the Iron Age provided foundations for medieval European governmental systems, particularly in areas where Germanic tribal traditions were adapted to territorial administration and diverse population management. The concepts of personal loyalty, warrior service, and territorial authority that characterized Iron Age political organization influenced the development of feudalism and other medieval political systems, while traditional legal practices were incorporated into medieval law codes and judicial procedures. The cultural memory of Iron Age achievements, preserved through oral traditions, archaeological discoveries, and historical research, continues to influence modern European identity and cultural consciousness. The Romantic revival of Celtic culture during the 18th and 19th centuries drew inspiration from archaeological discoveries and historical research that revealed the sophisticated achievements of Iron Age European societies, while modern Celtic nationalism and cultural movements maintain connections to prehistoric traditions and identities. The scientific study of Iron Age Europe has revolutionized understanding of prehistoric European civilization, while developing methodological approaches that have transformed archaeology as a discipline. The interdisciplinary techniques employed in Iron Age research, including environmental archaeology, experimental archaeology, and materials science applications, have created new opportunities for understanding ancient societies while establishing methodological standards that influence archaeological research worldwide. The transformation of Iron Age Europe into the medieval European cultural landscape represents one of the most significant cultural syntheses in human history, combining indigenous prehistoric traditions with Mediterranean classical culture and Christian religious practices to create the foundations of modern European civilization. The This synthesis preserved essential elements of Iron Age achievement while adapting them to new political, religious and cultural requirements that would influence European development throughout the medieval period and beyond. The archaeological record reveals that this transformation was neither sudden nor complete, but rather a gradual process that extended over several centuries and involved the selective preservation and adaptation of prehistoric traditions within new cultural frameworks that would define European civilization for the next millennium.